Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I smelled the paraffin before I saw the thing. A sweet, chemical odor leaked from the cardboard box left outside my studio door, mixing with the stale hallway air. No label, no return address, only my name scrawled in thick black ink that bled into the corrugated surface. The building was silent. Every footstep I took echoed down the narrow passage like a dropped wrench in an empty warehouse. My heart beat hard against my ribs as I locked the door behind me and carried the box inside. The package weighed almost nothing. I set it on the kitchen counter beneath a flickering bulb and slit the tape with my house key. Inside lay a human-sized hand, molded from pale wax, the surface mottled with tiny cracks as if heat had kissed it and hurried away. The fingers were curled into a loose fist. At the base of the wrist, a short steel pin protruded like a broken bone. I swallowed the taste of metal creeping up my throat and told myself it was a late joke from somebody who'd found my address online. That explanation felt thin, even before the first strange sound fluttered through my apartment. A faint scratch, like dry leaves dragged across linoleum. I checked every corner. Nothing moved. When I returned, the hand had opened. On the countertop, grains of salt formed a crude spiral around it, each crystal reflecting the cold light. My pulse stuttered, my breath came short, and a drizzle of sweat prickled my scalp. I swept the salt away with a dish towel, wrapped the hand in 2 layers of plastic, and shoved it into the deepest kitchen drawer. The plastic crinkled like someone whispering from under the bed. I forced myself to work at my computer, filling a spreadsheet while glancing over my shoulder every 10 seconds. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the ceiling lower, the walls damp. When I finally crawled into bed, the city outside was nothing but a distant hum. I left the hall light on. Tap, tap, scrape. I woke in the dark with my veins buzzing. Heat rolled across my chest. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. The noise came from the living room floor. I crept out, bare feet tingling on the cold boards. Moonlight slanted through the single window and landed on something white near the couch. The wax hand sat upright on its palm, 5 fingers kneading the floor like a sleepy cat. Salt trickled from an unseen opening in the wrist, leaving thin trails that forked and curled into symbols I didn't understand. I watched, frozen, as one index finger traced a looping character that looked like a reversed 3. Another finger dragged a line beneath it, then a second line that crossed the first, forming crude letters, open. My breath rattled between my teeth. I thought of grabbing the hand and hurling it outside, but my muscles would not obey. Instead, I retreated to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the tile while dizziness swooped through my skull. After an hour, I cracked the door. The hand lay motionless. The salt words remained. I swept them into a dustpan, dumped everything into the garbage chute, and flushed the remaining grains from under my nails. Sleep returned in short, fractured bursts. Each time my eyelids jerked open, I imagined the hand creeping closer, scratching, writing. Morning brought gray light and a headache. The hand was gone from the living room. I found it in the kitchen sink, fingers splayed, wrist angled toward the ceiling. Salt ringed the drain in precise arcs. I tugged the drawer where I'd hidden the plastic wrap. It was still shut, still wrapped. The logic in my mind bent and threatened to snap. I slipped the hand into a paper bag and carried it to the dumpster behind the building. The lid slammed like a coffin door. Inside, I scrubbed the sink until my fingertips wrinkled. The acrid scent of bleach failed to clear the paraffin stench lingering in the air. For distraction, I researched wax effigies, salt warding, automatic writing. Forms hinted at folk magic tied to mirrors, portals, thresholds, doors beyond. Each post felt like a splinter under the skin. That night, the scratching began earlier, while I was brushing my teeth. I stepped into the dim hallway and saw glittering lines of salt stretching from the front door to my bedroom. At the far end, resting against my nightstand, the hand wrote in slow strokes. beyond the glass. My chest throbbed. Sweat crawled down my spine. I called an old friend, Theo, who dabbled in occult books. My voice wavered as I described wax, salt, symbols. He joked that I needed sleep, then softened when he heard the tremor behind my words. He mumbled about apotropaic circles, rituals half remembered. He said reflection could be both shield and invitation. His advice stopped the circle from closing. I hung up and viewed my reflection in the dark window. The glass showed the room behind me, but the angles felt subtly wrong. Walls slightly bowed, shadows deeper than they should be. My head pounded. I unplugged every lamp and fell into bed with the blankets tight to my throat. 3 a.m. The hand scraped inches from the mattress. Salt sketched a nearly perfect ring around my bed frame. One gap the width of my palm remained open at the foot. I bolted upright. The air tasted of burned plastic. My pulse hammered against my skull so hard my vision shimmered. I kicked the circle apart, sending salt spraying like fine hail. The hand jerked, stiffened, slumped sideways. I shoved it beneath a laundry basket and weighted the top with the heaviest book I owned. I paced until sunrise, heart rate refusing to settle. Every so often the basket rattled, a dull thunk like a mouth chewing through cloth. By afternoon, paranoia stalked every step. I taped the bathroom mirror, covered the television, turned photographs face down. Yet reflections lingered in chrome faucets, in black laptop screens. Each showed corners where something indistinct seemed to watch. When eyelids shut, I felt the gaze continue, needles pricking beneath skin. I reread Theo's messages. Salt marks boundaries, doors need frames. Break the line, break the path. I scattered salt across windowsills, door frames, vents. My studio looked like a butcher's freezer dusted with frost. Night fell too quickly. The city's neon glow failed to slip through the curtains I'd pinned tight. In the dark, I heard the basket tip. The thud vibrated the floorboards. My breathing turned ragged, a rasp in my ears. I armed myself with a broom and edged closer. The basket lay overturned. The wax hand crawled toward the bathroom, dragging a wide arc of salt behind it. The symbols were sharper now, angles cutting with purpose. Letters formed words. Open the door. I swept at it. The broom bristles knocked the wrist sideways, but the fingers clamped onto the handle, pushing back with rubbery strength. I lurched, stomped, but the hand scuttled beneath the bed. Salt spilled across my bare ankles. Every grain felt electrified. Under the bed springs, the hand scratched wood. The lines sounded deliberate, practiced. I hauled the mattress off, flipped the frame, and exposed a pattern etched in salt across the plank floor. A half-finished circle missing only a sliver. My own sweat dripped onto it, dissolving crystals, warping the shape. The hand paused, then altered its route, inking fresh lines to compensate. Desperation squeezed my chest. I dashed into the kitchenette, grabbed a jug of water and splashed it across the symbols. Salt melted into thick pools. The hand recoiled, fingers twitching. I seized a roll of duct tape and bound the thing to a metal spatula, wrapping tape until silver layers choked the wax flesh. Still it wriggled, a pinned insect under glass. I stuffed it into the freezer. Frost hissed against paraffin. The door slammed with a rubber seal's thunk, muting the muffled thumps inside. Cold seeped into my bones, even as relief hissed from my lungs, but silence never wholly returned. Behind the freezer door, faint scratching persisted. Worse, I realized the water had merely pushed dissolved salt outward. Thin rivulets had already recrystallized, shaping new curves along the baseboards, converging toward the bathroom mirror I had failed to cover completely. The mirror waited in dim lamplight, glass surface graying like tarnished silver. My reflection wore a stranger's expression, eyes too large, skin waxy. Behind him, in that reflected studio, the freezer door stood open. The taped hand perched on the edge, free, pointing toward me. My scalp tightened so hard it hurt. I spun. The real freezer remained shut. When I looked again at the mirror, the other apartment was darker, but something tall and thin stood in the doorway, details lost in static haze. My breath stopped. I backed away, ribs aching. The reflection tilted its head as though considering the gap between worlds. I heard a brittle crack echo from inside the glass, like old paint peeling. I remembered Theo's warning. Frames define boundaries. I yanked the mirror from the wall and hurled it face down. The glass fractured with a gunshot pop. Silvered shards scattered like spilled mercury. In their broken faces, miniature copies of the studio multiplied, each shard a potential door. Panic surged. Every heartbeat drummed in my ears. I scooped handfuls of shards into a trash bag, cutting my palms. Bright blood peppered the plastic. I bound the bag shut, wrapped it in 2 towels, crammed it into the deepest closet corner, and wedged a chair against the door. The hand drummed faster inside the freezer. The compressor clicked off. Stillness spread, thick as tar. Dawn seeped gray across the ceiling. The city's hum returned, but the air inside remained heavy, close, as if the room had inhaled overnight and refused to exhale. I opened the freezer. The hand lay inert, surface glazed with rime. Ice crystals sealed the tape against the spatula. I set the frozen bundle on the counter, poured lighter fluid, and struck a match. Flames crawled, wax softened, fumes stung my throat. The hand sagged into a puddle of pale sludge that sizzled and popped. I scraped the cooled lump into a metal tin, snapped the lid, and carried it 3 blocks to a construction site dumpster brimming with concrete dust. The tin landed with a dull clang, swallowed by gray rubble. Back home, I vacuumed every ounce of salt. I scrubbed until my fingertips split. By afternoon, exhaustion pinned my eyelids, but the apartment looked clean, almost ordinary. The broken mirror remained locked in the closet behind the chair, its presence a weight pressing against my thoughts. I dozed on the couch. When I opened my eyes, late sunlight poured through the window, painting rectangles across the floor. At the center of one rectangle rested a single grain of salt, gleaming like quartz. My breath snagged. Beside it lay a faint wax smear, as though something had dragged a soft fingernail over wood. My mouth dried. I checked the freezer. Empty. I checked the kitchen drawer. Empty. Yet the paraffin smell returned, drifting on the air conditioner breeze. Near the closet, I heard a gentle tap, like knuckles on glass. The salt grain quivered, rolled in a tiny circle, and stopped, pointing toward the closet door. I backed away until my calves hit the couch. The room around me felt wider now, as if an unseen corridor had opened behind each wall, waiting. My heartbeat pounded at the base of my skull. The tapping grew rhythmic. 4 slow knocks, a pause, 4 again. An invitation disguised as patience. I don't know if the ritual ever truly needed the wax hand, or if it only required my attention, my fear, my willingness to intervene. The circle might have closed when I broke the mirror, when I trusted what I saw in glass over what I felt beneath my skin. Every reflective surface still holds a shard of that door, and I can sense hinges creaking somewhere just beyond the apartment's thin walls. I leave the lights on now, but brightness only sharpens the edges of the shadows. At night, I hear salt sliding across wood in rooms I have already cleaned. I count heartbeats until dawn and pray that each morning arrives before the final line is drawn. Because once the door beyond the mirror opens fully, I'm no longer sure there will be anywhere left to run. Only endless reflections, each one waiting to claim what crossed its frame. Story 2. I felt the desert long before I saw it. An oven-hot breath that pushed through the open door of the gas station diner and settled on my face like a damp cloth. The air tasted of old copper and motor oil. My bus had died 2 towns back, stranding me on a rattling stretch of highway, whose asphalt shimmered as though hiding coals beneath its skin. When the tanker truck hissed to a stop outside, the ground trembled just enough to rattle the coffee in my cup. I told myself I had no other choice. I climbed into the cab and shut the door on the noon glare. Everything inside was dim and brown, the way a basement feels after years of forgetting. The driver, bald, bearded, eyes so pale they seemed bleached, nodded without smiling. He gestured to the passenger seat, and I slid in, the vinyl exhaling a stale, chemical sigh under my weight. My palms already sweated. The truck growled back onto the highway. Heat ripples distorted the horizon, making distant buttes melt into the sky. Fine grains of sand sneaked through the vents, scratching at my throat every time I inhaled. Moments later, the driver flicked on the radio. Instantly, the cab filled with warped syllables, as if a choir were chanting underwater and playing the tape backward. Consonants scraped together, vowels bled into each other. I caught a quick inhaling gasp in the noise. My own. He said almost cheerfully that the dial only caught one station these days. I asked what it was. He answered that it wasn't broadcasting to us, but from us, and laughed once, dry, hollow. My heart skipped. The laugh felt rehearsed, like dust stirred from an attic trunk. The tachograph, mounted between us, ticked with a restless insect rhythm. Its digital readout slid from 0.00 to 0.01, then kept counting down. 0.02, 0.03. I rubbed my eyes, blinked hard, but the minus sign clung to the numbers. The driver murmured that the odometer told truth at last, that we weren't piling up miles, only shedding them, driving backward through distance. He called it rebocando lembranzas, towing memories, and said it the way a mechanic might announce a tire rotation. Routine, inevitable. Sweat trickled along my ribs. The cab smelled of scorched metal and something sweeter. Old lilacs, maybe, that turned my stomach. I pressed my head to the cool glass of the side window. The desert scrolled past. White sun, rust-red rock, no wind. Just beyond the truck's shadow, I glimpsed a darker smear on the road, too steady to be dust. I leaned closer. Behind the trailer, stretched like an invisible train of kites, drifted dozens of shapes. They shimmered as if carved from breath on a winter morning, human outlines stripped of detail. Some upright, some twisted sideways, each tethered to the rear bumper by nothing visible. They bobbed and jerked whenever the truck hit a bump, yet never lost formation. My pulse thudded hard enough to blur my vision. I kept staring until the driver's voice floated across. "Better not look too long," he warned, or I'd recognize familiar faces among them. My neck crawled with icy pins. I tore my gaze forward and fixed on the cracked windshield, where sand pitted the glass like small meteor strikes. We drove. The sun blistered westward. Shadows lengthened in distorted angles across the dashboard. Static hissed from the speakers. Sometimes I thought I heard my own name spiraling inside those reversed syllables, as if my identity were being chewed apart and spat back in fragments. My throat tightened. I asked where he was headed. He replied that he followed the weight, not the map, and pointed at the tachograph now reading 037. Each negative kilometer tugged us further from something, though I couldn't say what. I tried to steady my breathing, counting in for 4, out for 6, but every exhale rattled. The seat vibrated with the engine's rhythm, translating mechanical pulse into bone. My fingers drummed on my thigh, dripped sweat onto dusty denim. The driver talked in low sentences about memories heavier than cargo, how most folks dropped them on the roadside, but some got snagged and dragged forever. He claimed the desert didn't forget. It only waited for enough miles to fall away so the past could surface like old roadkill. The radio whine modulated, rising in pitch until it resolved into a phrase I almost understood. A scraped-up version of my mother's lullaby, but backward, impossibly slow. The notes curled around my eardrums and squeezed. I tasted copper on my tongue. My heartbeat rocketed. I pressed my fist to my chest. Outside, the sky bruised purple. Headlights carved narrow tunnels through drifting dust. Beyond the beam range, darkness thickened into clots. I forced myself to peer at the mirror again. The silhouettes multiplied, scores now, stretching far behind, overlapping so densely they looked like an oil slick of translucent bodies. One at the front, larger than the rest, cocked its head, mimicking my motion. Cold needles stabbed my scalp, I jerked away. The driver said I might feel a tug soon, like catching my coat on a fence nail. That would be the first hook. He recommended I remain seated if it happened. Fighting only deepened the barbs. His tone held no malice, just dull certainty. I swallowed, but my mouth felt lined with sandpaper. We crossed an abandoned way station. Skeletal lights flickered, offering no illumination, only the memory of it. The truck thundered through. In that strobe, my reflection on the side glass stuttered, an image missing frames. For 2 beats, my eyes in the reflection were not my own. Blank, white, polished like river stones. I flinched, heart slamming so hard my ribs ached. When I blinked, my reflection returned to normal, but sweat now drenched my shirt as though I'd run miles. The tachograph clicked to 066. The driver remarked that some numbers were thresholds, others doors. Soon we'd cross one that opened wide enough for the payload. He said that once we breached 100, things would slip free, and gravity would reverse in ways a living body might resent. He spoke these things calmly, as if reciting directions to the nearest truck stop. My breath came in ragged shards. I flexed my legs, tested the latch on the door. It stuck, paint welded by heat. My pulse sprinted. I forced myself to think through options. The side window? Small, but maybe. I pictured a tumble onto the shoulder, rocks shredding my skin, maybe a broken wrist. Pain seemed friendlier than whatever weighted past negative triple digits. I stole a glance at him. His knuckles were bone white where they gripped the wheel, but his face showed a battered serenity, like a man who'd cried out every tear decades ago. Beneath the dashboard, something glimmered. A thick chain wrapped around his ankle, the other end buried under the floor mat. It pulsed once, as if alive, then lay still. I realized he wasn't driving. He was driven. The cab temperature plunged without warning. My breath fogged. The radio's reversed chorus deepened into a sub-bass rumble that squeezed my eardrums until pain flashed behind my eyes. The silhouettes behind us fluttered like torn flags, straining forward, hungry for our momentum. Tachograph. 089. My seatbelt buckle rasped against its housing. I looked down. The metal loop twisted by itself, threading through the belt strap like a serpentine thing. I yanked at it, but it tightened across my lap, locking me in place. Panic detonated inside my chest. I tasted bile. Outside, the desert vanished into an unlit void. The headlights showed only swirling gray, like driving through milk. In that gloom, outlines surfaced. Half-built houses, dead billboards, gleaming playground swings without children. Each floated for a heartbeat, then dissolved. The driver said we were skimming under the skin of all the places people forget, towing what they leave behind. Tachograph. EO094. The belt crushed my ribs. I could barely breathe. My skin prickled with a spreading numbness, as though my blood carried ice. A whisper uncoiled past my ear, my own voice reciting an old regret. The phone call I never made, the apology swallowed. Another murmur joined it. My father's cough the night he left, the sound I pretended not to hear. Each whispered memory threaded through me like cold wire, yanking toward the rear of the cab. The driver warned softly that once the belt locked, the next tie would be the spine. He suggested choosing quick surrender over slow dissection. His eyes never left the road. Tachograph. 097. My hands shook so hard the vinyl creaked. I reached for the pocket knife on my keyring, flipped the blade, sawed at the belt. Fibers parted one by one. The truck jolted across a cattle guard. Steel rattled like laughter. Outside, silhouettes leaped closer, faces suddenly clearer. Features half-formed, mouths open in silent recall. I recognized my younger self among them, age 7, holding a broken toy truck. The sight punched the air from my lungs. Tachograph. EO99. I sliced the last strand. The belt snapped loose. My limbs tingled with returning blood. The cab's door handle glowed faint red, as if heated. I grabbed it. Pain seared my palm. Skin blistered instantly, but adrenaline burned hotter. I shoved. The door shrieked open. Wind and sand roared in, clawing my face. The silhouette surged forward, stretching thin, desperate to cling. Fingers of frost traced my spine. Tachograph. 100. A crack like thunder split the air. The truck lifted on its suspension, as though the trailer had suddenly lightened. The driver shouted, first real emotion in his voice, telling me to choose. I chose. I hurled myself into the night. Air hammered my chest, flipped me sideways. I hit desert gravel rolling, every impact lighting white explosions behind my eyes. The world spun. Sky, ground. Rocks shredded my jacket, skinned my elbows. I skidded to a stop in tangled sagebrush, lungs flaming. The truck's taillights dwindled, red beads swallowed by darkness. Silence collapsed over the desert, broken only by my ragged breaths and the distant hum of tires receding toward nothing. I lay on my back, heart kicking at my ribs, staring at a sky smeared with indifferent stars. Sweat iced on my skin. Gradually, the radio static faded from my ears. The tachograph numbers still pulsed in my mind, though, counting deeper into negative space. I pulled myself to my feet, joints screaming. No silhouettes hovered nearby. Yet when I glanced over my shoulder, the moonlight caught something faint. A smear of translucent gray trailing from my shadow like a frayed ribbon, flickering in and out of sight with each heartbeat. I dusted my palms, clenched them, unclenched. The ribbon persisted, thin as breath, impossible to grab. I told myself it was fatigue, dehydration, concussion. But every few steps the tug returned, a gentle backward pull, persuasive as nostalgia. Somewhere out on the empty highway the truck kept going, rebocando lembrances. I wondered how many silhouettes it had shed along the way, how many walked desert shoulders tonight thinking they'd escaped. I started toward the faint glow of distant service station lights, boots crunching over salt-crusted gravel. Breath steady, eyes forward. Yet the soft drag behind me matched every stride, like a leash made of fog. I didn't look back again, but I felt it, always just behind, the past riding on my heels, weightless yet heavy, whispering my name in reverse. And the desert, patient as an undertaker, waited for the miles to fall away. Story 3. When the rain wasn't heavy enough to wash the city clean, only to slick every surface into obsidian sheen and smear the light into nervous halos. My shift had dragged long after midnight, and the rides were few, each one whisper quiet, as though the downpour had hushed the world on purpose. I remember thinking the silence felt engineered, something tightening a lid over the usual late-night chaos, sealing every sound inside the cabins of parked cars and vacant houses. I should have gone home, but the app chimed. A pickup on a side street that almost never pinged at this hour. Curiosity and the promise of a surge fare outweighed fatigue, so I tapped. Accept. I rolled into a block where the streetlights were spaced too far apart, leaving strips of black glass between puddles of orange. The passenger already stood at the curb. No umbrella, no phone in hand, no restless glance toward my approaching headlights, just a static figure in a long coat, hood pulled low. I idled beside him, unlocked the doors, and heard the muffled click of the handle. He slipped into the backseat directly behind me. The interior light flicked on for a heartbeat, then off again, offering only a blurred glimpse. Pale skin, water beading on the coat's shoulders, eyes too deep in shadow to meet mine. He said a single word, so low I felt it more than heard it. Drive. I cleared my throat, asked the usual question about destination. No reply. The app listed an address beyond the river, and silence implied consent. I merged onto the arterial road, wipers thudding in anesthetic rhythm. Backseat passengers often vanish into their phones. The lack of screen glow at my 6 o'clock felt wrong, like an absence you can taste. The first bridge loomed, a utilitarian span of concrete girders over dark water. Habit made me flick my gaze to the rear view. His seat appeared empty. My chest thumped once, hard. I snapped my eyes to the road, then back to the mirror. Nothing but faint reflections of dashboard light on wet upholstery. Yet I felt him. The slight forward lean of the car, the pressure of unseen weight on the cushion, the delicate sound of breathing that was not mine. The air cooled around my nape, smelling of river fog. On the opposite shore, sodium lamps stitched the boulevard into perspective lines. I risked a glance again. There he was, head tilted, rainwater trickling from the hood edge like threads of mercury. My scalp prickled. I convinced myself the earlier absence had been poor angle, glass glare, anything. I swallowed, tasted copper. The city thinned. Storefronts surrendered to warehouses, then to derelict lots tufted with weeds. The phone GPS glowed steady green until the map jerked, the route line jittering as though the road beneath us convulsed. A gray bar slid over the screen. Distant cell towers must have died in the storm, I thought. I asked if he still needed the listed address or preferred an alternate. Again, that low syllable rasped. East. The only path east was the old highway, a ribbon of cracked asphalt seldom patrolled. I merged, tires hissing. The speedometer sat at 60, but every mile felt stolen. Lightning flickered, exposing abandoned billboards ragged as flayed skin. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles bleached stark. I became hyper-aware of my body, pulse banging in ears, breath hitching at the top of each inhale, sweat sprouting cold under my arms despite the air conditioning set low. Another bridge, this one narrow, its guardrails broken in spots. Mirror instinct. The seat was empty again. The car seemed lighter by an impossible margin, as if someone had lifted a cinder block off the chassis. My stomach dropped. Headlights wavered sideways when I jerked the wheel. In the same instant, a whisper brushed my right ear, coming from the rear. Keep going. Moist breath chilled the skin. Reflex twisted me to look over my shoulder, but darkness pooled where a person should have been. I faced forward just in time to steer from the verge. Mile markers grew sparse until they vanished. Trees crept closer, branches meshing overhead into a tunnel that shuttered the sky. Whenever lightning cracked, the trees appeared to shift positions, as though each flash redrew the landscape by drunken hand. The car's cabin pressed inward. I could feel the hum of the engine through the pedals like the purr of a caged animal, anxious, ready to bolt. My dashboard dinged. I glanced down and felt my mouth go paper dry. The distance to empty read in brow, 333 km/h. Negative fuel range, a number that denied physics, an omen carved in digital glyphs. My foot eased off the accelerator. The engine coughed, hiccuped, threatened to stall. I feathered the gas again, pulse drumming a frantic counterpoint. At the next bend, the world opened into a massive interchange, a cloverleaf abandoned decades ago, when the new bypass rendered it obsolete. Weed-choked ramps spiraled into black void. Rusted signs hung askew, their letters scabbed with mold. Streetlights here were dead, leaving only the headlamps to scratch circles across concrete walls streaked with mineral ghosts. The passenger spoke at last in a serrated whisper. Here. I braked. The engine sputtered once, then died with a shudder. Absolute dark folded over the cabin, window glass misting with my hot exhale. I twisted the key. Starter clicked. Nothing. A tingle crawled from my spine to fingertips. Adrenal glands fired acid into blood. I understood instinctively. If I remained stopped, I was prey. I jabbed the ignition again. The engine caught like a reluctant sleeper dragged from nightmare, roaring insulted back to life. The dashboard still bled. 333 km/h. I jammed the shifter into drive and shot forward onto the inner loop. Concrete walls funneled the beams ahead. Road reflectors pulsed by like cardiac monitors. I counted the seconds between merging ramps. 1, 2, 3, expecting to exit where the outer lanes rejoined the highway. Instead, after the fourth clover arm, I found myself facing the same graffiti-scarred retaining wall I had passed seconds earlier. My throat constricted. The loop had closed. Sweat seeped into my lower back. Panic tempted me to scream, but I bit the inside of my cheek until iron flooded my tongue. I forced slow breaths. In 2-3, out 2-3, as training from a forgotten mindfulness app resurfaced like a life preserver. While my mind wrestled for calm, the cabin changed. The overhead fabric sagged as though soaked in invisible moisture. The air vents exhaled a smell of stagnant pond. I realized I could no longer hear rain on the roof. The storm outside had gone mute, or perhaps ceased to exist beyond the boundaries of this asphalt Mobius strip. A new sound slithered in, the wet rustle of a coat sleeve. Peripheral vision registered motion in the rear view, subtle, a shift of darkness within darkness. I refused to look, kept eyes pinned to the monotony ahead. My peripheral saw anyway. Fingers like pale reeds slid over the headrest behind my right ear, withdrawing slowly, deliberately, as if testing reaction time. I thought of pulling the door lever and rolling onto the pavement at 60 miles per hour, better bruises than the unknown. But the wheel locked under my palms, snapping the daydream. The car chose speed without my foot. RPM climbed, tunnels of concrete blurred. My breaths clipped into quick, ragged shards. The voice came, neither loud nor soft, lodged directly beside the auditory canal. Full circle. Again. It throbbed like bass under skin rather than airborne sound. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Another ramp, another unbroken wall of déjà vu. My eyes stung. Tears weren't grief. They were the body's revolt against impossible geometry. I needed an anchor, something to prove linear time still applied. I flicked on the cabin light. For half a second the bulb glimmered, then burst with a pop, gluing glass shards to the socket. But in that stroboscopic instant, I saw him fully, the coat dripping though we'd left the rain, limbs too long proportionally, joints hinged wrong, chin resting on the top of the passenger seat as if spine lacked vertebrae. His face held no features beyond suggestion, like a photo blurred to protect identity. Yet I felt a gaze puncturing the back of my skull. The light died, plunging me into thicker blackness than before, as if the filament had cauterized reality on its way out. My heartbeat misfired. Peripheral vision danced with phosphines. I realized the creature was doing nothing, to me, except insisting I continue. The loop obeyed him. The car obeyed the loop. I was the variable meant to crack. Why the negative range? A message. Distance traveled towards 0 or beyond. The number felt like a countdown set below the threshold. Less than void. Debt owed in kilometers. I spoke aloud. Not quite dialogue, more a disemboweled thought that escaped. I told the thing I didn't understand what it wanted. My own voice sounded alien, scraped raw by fear. The reply seeped through the upholstery, through the engine vibration, through my sternum. Remember. Memory stabbed unbidden. Years ago I had parked beneath this very interchange during a delivery shift. Engine off, seat reclined, eyes closed against dawn. I had been too exhausted, nodded off. When I woke, half dreaming, I had experienced the uncanny certainty that someone or something had climbed from the shadows of the cloverleaf and watched me through the windshield. Too petrified to investigate, I had restarted the car and sped away, patting the dashboard like a talisman. I remembered dismissing the incident over coffee later, laughing it off with coworkers, burying the residue of dread under sarcasm. Now the interchange had festered, gestated that anxious energy into form. The passenger was the embodiment of a fear I'd abandoned here, an unpaid toll. I swallowed against a throat gone gravel dry and whispered an apology into the dark. For intruding, for ignoring, for refusing the courtesy of acknowledgement. Heat flushed my cheeks, though the cabin remained icy. My fingers slackened. For the first time since the loop began, I took my foot off the pedal voluntarily. The engine continued on momentum, then softened to idle. I guided the vehicle to a crawl along the shoulder until it rolled to a stop beside a crumbling Jersey barrier. Silence layered upon silence. The dashboard still glowed. 303 kilometer, but its glare seemed less accusatory, merely factual. I waited for the stall, for the key to refuse, for the cabin to collapse inward. Instead, the car idled, steady hum threading through the floorboard. The smell of pond water receded, replaced by the mundane odor of vinyl and stale coffee from my travel mug. I turned slightly, expecting empty space or nightmare visage. The back seat showed a depression in the fabric, darkened by absorbed moisture, but no occupant. I reached a trembling hand to touch the indentation. It sprang back, erasing the physical proof. A wind rushed overhead, the storm's voice returning, rattling rusted guardrails. Outside, a distant set of headlights swept the overpass like a lighthouse beam, proving that linear traffic still existed somewhere. I faced forward, heart hammering but rhythmically now, measurable, mortal. The odometer blinked, digits cycling, freezing finally at Rayari 3, Karawair, a logical remainder. GPS flickered alive, map grid loading slow as sunrise. The path home etched itself in blue. When I eased back onto the ramp, the interchange felt no less ruined, but the road flowed outward this time, offering exit lanes like open hands. In my mirror, the backseat remained properly dull, reflecting nothing unusual. Only rain streaking glass and the faint silhouette of my own headrest. I merged onto the highway, speed safe, wipers beating familiar time. Yet with every mile, another question fed the static at the edge of hearing. Had I satisfied the thing's demand, or merely negotiated parole? My shoulders ached from tension that refused to leave. The lingering chill suggested a passenger-shaped vacancy still sharing the ride, invisible but attentive. When I reached the city limits, neon bled across wet asphalt. The distance to empty ticked down as usual, but whenever my peripheral vision strayed to the mirror, a phantom number overlaid the display in the mind's eye. 333. An IOU etched not in fuel but in fear, redeemable any night I choose to forget what lurks between bridges and broken clover leaves. I pulled into my driveway before dawn, engine ticking as it cooled. Rain had stopped. I sat until the sky paled, reluctant to kill the headlights, unwilling to let the interior fall dark again. When I finally shut the car off, the gauge needles quivered, settled. I told myself the tank was 3/4 full. Yet deep in the dashboard, behind plastic and wires, I imagined a hollow where numbers could still run backward, tallying debts in inverted kilometers, waiting for the next circuit. Sleep that day came fractured, punctured by dreams of roads folding over themselves, of mirrors showing only vacancy, of hooded figures whose faces blur even in memory. Each time I woke, heart sprinting, I felt for the floor beneath my bed to make sure it remained motionless. I have kept driving, the bills demand it, but every time a ride request pings from the far side of the river, I feel sweat pebble along my hairline, and I swipe. Decline. The passenger may still be out there, indifferent to time, waiting beneath dead streetlights for the driver who owes him a debt measured in negative distance. And some night, when I am too tired or too desperate, I might accept again. Until then, every bridge carries an echo, every mirror a chance for absence, and every engine shudder a reminder that horror is not always what occupies the seat behind you. It's what rides the miles you thought you left behind. Story 4. The first sour note slipped in like a razor under the skin of the night. I was alone in the loft, sweat already slick on my palms from the relentless summer heat and the nerves that always came before a show. My guitar rested against my thigh, the amp growling at a hushed volume that let every finger slide hiss and pop in the air. Exposed brick walls drank in the sound, and a single bulb above my head flickered like it had the hiccups. The room smelled of old wood, warm cables, and the metallic tang of anxiety. That was when I heard it. The reedy wheeze of a bandoneon, drawn slow, as if someone were testing each fold of the bellows for weakness. The melody slithered out of the wall to my right, not loud, but precise, landing on pitches no street accordionist could hit in a decade of rambling lunches for tips. I froze, hand hovering above the fretboard, heart punching hard against my ribs. Sweat cooled on my spine. There was no one else here, no recording, no neighbor, just that impossible music vibrating in the plaster. The note bent upward, teasing me, before sliding into silence. I waited. My breathing went shallow. The bulb above buzzed like an angry fly. Then the bandoneon sighed again, deeper inside the wall, tracing a line of minor thirds that left a sour copper aftertaste in my mouth. Something in that sound felt invasive, like fingers prying open my eardrums. I set the guitar down and pressed my ear to the brick. Cold grit kissed my skin. The melody flickered, distant, then clearer, almost under my fingertips. I traced the mortar lines and found a hairline seam I'd never noticed. A narrow rectangle the size of a vent panel. The loft was an old print shop, retrofitted quick by a landlord who loved shortcuts. Hidden spaces weren't exactly unlikely. I slid a flathead screwdriver from my amp kit, wedged it into the seam and twisted. Mortar dust puffed out. The panel clicked and shifted inward. My stomach knotted with a thrill that felt too close to dread. Behind the brick lay pitch darkness and a smell like rosin and cold iron. I aimed my phone light. A narrow corridor stretched away, swallowing the beam after a few yards. The walls were paneled in splintered wood, warped by age, lined with hooks. From each hook hung an instrument, violins stripped of strings, cellos with hollow throats, banjos missing their bridges, mandolins flayed down to naked fretboards. Yet as I stared, a faint orchestra stirred, notes whispering from those mutilated bodies, as if nerves still fired inside dead limbs. I should have slammed the panel shut, called the landlord, packed my gear. Instead, I stepped through. Curiosity can feel like a hook slipped behind the breastbone, tugging you forward even as reason claws at your heels. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the air tightened. The bulb in the loft behind me buzzed once and died. My phone signal vanished, the screen glitching to static before the flashlight snapped off. Only the corridor's faint phosphorescence remained, pale motes swirling like dust on moonlit water. Every breath I took tasted of varnish and mildew. I moved, slow. The instruments greeted me with a shiver of sound. A violin scraped a G that vibrated in my sternum. A gutted cello thrummed a low C that rattled my molars. With each note, a dull pressure settled over my ears, like diving too deep too fast. I swallowed, felt the eustachian tubes fight to equalize. A ringing crept in from the edges of hearing, thin and persistent. Panic nudged me, but fascination drowned it. I passed guitars stripped down to bare necks, their missing strings humming as though plucked by invisible hands. The corridor didn't end. No doors branched off, no stairs, no junctions. Just that single path and its choir of amputated instruments. Minutes, or hours, blurred. Time dilated under the drone of uneasy harmonies. My shirt clung to me, soaked. My pulse thudded in my throat. Every few steps, another sliver of hearing peeled away. High frequencies dulled first, the whisper of my shoes on warped planks, the hiss of my breath. Lower registers followed. Anxious sweat trickled past my ear, but I heard nothing of its tiny splash on the floor. I tried speaking, just a test, maybe a shaky, "Hello?" It came out muffled, distant, like shouting through layers of wool. Above the ringing now lounged a hollow silence, thick and carnivorous. Then the corridor widened into a rotunda the size of a small chapel, but windowless and roofed in beams that dripped tar-black shadows. In the center stood a music stand carved from ebony, empty except for a single sheet of vellum yellowed by ages. The instruments from the corridor circled the walls here, hundreds of them, all stringless, all yawning open like ribs without lungs. Yet they breathed music, synchronized in a slow current of sound that coiled around me, palpated my bones and squeezed tiny bursts of hearing from my skull. Behind the stand hung a mirror tall as a doorframe, its silver backing tarnished to a bruised gray. My reflection wavered, blurred, as though filmed underwater. Across the glass flickered faint staves of notation, inked notes shifting like birds startled from wire to wire. The orchestra hushed. Silence, massive and suffocating, fell so abruptly I staggered. In that vacuum, I sensed a tension, a presence perched just beyond sight, studying me with avid patience. My skin prickled, hairs stiffened along my forearms. The mirror clouded, then cleared, revealing no figure but my own. Yet I felt the weight of an unseen gaze, and within it a command: compose. It struck me, not as words, but as pressure against the mind, a thumb twisting behind my ear. The sheet on the stand fluttered, though no wind blew. My tinnitus screamed, a banshee keen, before dropping out entirely, leaving a void where sound should be. Terror clicked on like a fuse. If the music kept feeding, I'd go deaf, sealed in this coffin of echoes forever. I gripped the stand, knuckles whitening. Somewhere behind me, a violin's body creaked, impatient. I understood the bargain with brutal clarity. Write a piece worthy of the maestro, this conductor cloaked in absence, or lose the last scraps of hearing. My phone still stuck dead in my pocket, but my memory brimmed with riffs, progressions, half-written songs scribbled in notebooks. I breathed, slow, despite lungs wanting to sprint. The sheet awaited ink I didn't have. Instead, I tapped rhythms on the wood with trembling fingers, mentally carving notes in silent space. A motif emerged, descending minor thirds, echo of the bandoneon that had lured me here. Underneath, a pedal tone, a sustained low E that throbbed like heart blood. I layered harmonics above, voices climbing out of dissonance toward a fragile resolution before slipping again into shadow. The instrument stirred. A mutilated viola emitted a cautious interval, matching my imagined line. Encouraged, I shaped a bridge, an uneasy waltz where time signatures bent like warped glass. Sweat rolled down my jaw. My legs quaked from hours of tension. Yet I pressed on, charting a final movement. A single rising scale that refused to resolve, suspending in perpetual hunger. The mirror brightened, the tarnish burning off in drifting flakes. My reflection sharpened, lips moving though no sound reached me. Along the glass, the notation I'd built in thought etched itself, stave by stave, ink bleeding like veins. The unseen maestro read. Arching behind me, the orchestra answered. Stringless violins sawed air, banjos rattled phantom rolls, mandolins shimmered like orbiting insects. The rotunda pulsed. Vibrations threatened to liquefy my organs. Yet this time, the sound fed me rather than devouring. Frequencies returned, rushing back in a tidal roar. I heard the rattled pump of my own heart, the ragged rasp of breath, the distant city outside the loft walls I could no longer see. A final chord crashed, a hollow, perfect fifth that cracked the mirror down its center. Glass split, peeling apart like stage curtains. Beyond lay the loft, exactly as I'd left it. Single bulb flickering, guitar waiting, night pressing against dusty windows. I stepped through. With each pace, the corridor behind shrank, its walls folding into themselves like extinguished bellows. The panel sealed shut without a sound. The bulb steadied, glowing calm. Outside, distant traffic hissed. Normal, everyday life reasserted itself, but hung uneasy, as though I'd returned to a replica rather than the original world. I lifted my guitar, struck a chord. The G resonated true, but a ghost harmony lingered beneath. Subaudible, felt more than heard. The ringing in my ears subsided, yet a pale hush remained, as if part of my span of frequencies belonged elsewhere now. I slept poorly that night, dreams full of corridors that flexed and breathed. In the morning I searched the wall for seams, but mortar met brick in unbroken lines. No hidden latch, no draft, nothing but cool, stubborn masonry. Gigs came. My playing had changed. Subtle, but audiences leaned in, brows furrowed, like sensing a current of sound just beyond human range. Reviews called it haunting, otherworldly. I would finish a set to applause that dwindled into mild unease, listeners rubbing ears as if uncertain of what they'd truly heard. Sometimes, when the crowd settled, I caught a ribbon of distant bandoneon weaving through the final chord, teasing from within the stage walls. Its melody bent in minor thirds, approving, reminding me that the maestro still listened, always one note away. When that happens, a tremor crawls under my ribs, and I wonder what price comes with every encore. Story 5. The neon sign above the diner crackled in the wind-whipped dusk, sputtering violet flashes across a cracked parking lot that reeked of hot dust and stale gasoline. I killed the ignition and listened. Nothing but the ticking engine and the distant groan of desert air twisting through rusty road signs. My pulse drummed fast, too fast, as though something inside the squat, grimy building already knew I was coming. I told myself it was just hunger and the long, empty highway. The moment I pushed open the door, that excuse crumbled. A brass bell rasped overhead, harsh and metallic. Grease-shined booths lined the walls, yet every seat sat vacant. The overhead bulbs glowed a sickly amber, flickering hard enough to make shadows lurch across linoleum. My boots stuck to the floor like syrup. From behind a chipped formica counter, the owner stared, a thick-set man with a chef's coat yellowed by age. His eyes looked polished, almost reflective, like glass marbles that had soaked up too many confessions. Without a word, he gestured toward the nearest stool. I sat. Vinyl squeaked beneath me. Air tasted of burnt coffee and something sweet, like syrup left too long on a stove. My palms sweated. The owner slid a laminated menu my way, but my gaze latched onto the single line typed beneath the grim list of burgers and pies. House special, ask to receive. Nerves crawled along my spine. I heard the fluorescent buzz above grow louder, almost insect-like, drilling into my skull. When the man finally spoke, his voice came cold and even, more a recitation than conversation. Say grace in your heart, and the plate will know you. Then he turned and vanished into the back. My throat tightened. I looked around again, still empty, still wrong. I felt my pulse hammer, chest tight. I should have left, but hunger clawed inside me, a hollow ache from driving too many miles on caffeine. Minutes later, the owner returned, setting a shallow pewter dish before me. Its contents resembled creamy chowder, yet the surface shimmered like oil over water, colors sliding from pale ivory to murky violet. Steam rose thin and lilac-tinted, curling toward the buzzing lights. I swallowed dry air and lowered my head in a silent reflex of prayer. Habit drilled in by a strict childhood. The second the unspoken words crossed my mind, the surface of the chowder rippled. Tendrils of color spiraled inward, knitting into new textures, soft lumps hardening into crunchy ridges, then melting back before I could focus. A tremor shook my fingers. Still, I lifted a spoon. The first mouthful felt warm, savory, strangely comforting. Something earthy and nostalgic unfolded on my tongue. Grandmother's chicken, the cinnamon of Christmas breakfasts, the cold iron bite of my first nosebleed on a schoolyard. Flavor shifted faster than I could name it. I breathed out, and a faint purple mist hissed past my lips, vanishing before my eyes. A weightless gap opened in my thoughts. A detail I'd known a heartbeat earlier slid away, slippery as wet soap. I frowned, spoon hovering. What had I just remembered? A song? A face? Gone. Heartbeat spiked. Sweat prickled along my hairline. The owner watched, head tilted, expression blank. He tapped the counter once, heavy knuckles on laminate. The meaning was clear. Keep eating. Fear made my stomach knot, but curiosity dug deeper. I took another spoonful. Memories fluttered like moths hitting a bulb. Campfire smoke, a first kiss behind a bleacher's wall, my college dorm room stuffed with vinyl records. Vapor drifted from my nostrils and lips, twirling lavender ribbons that vanished into the dim. Each exhale left me lighter, but emptier too. I felt the loss in my chest, a hollow tug where warm recollection had lived. I forced the spoon down on the plate, metal clack echoing. Muscles trembled. Breath came shallow. The owner's voice slid over me. Soft, dry, inevitable. Our special absorbs secrets from those who chew. Finish, and you will feel clean. His words sounded like they were spoken from deep inside the diner's bones, not from his throat. I stood too fast. Stool legs screeched. The room lurched sideways. Tables stretched long, then snapped back. My vision swam in violet haze. Panic flared. I tried to recall my license plate number, my mother's middle name, even the motel I'd checked out of that morning. Blank spaces all. Terror roared through veins, heart punching so hard my ribs hurt. I needed the recipe, some antidote, anything. The kitchen held answers. I stepped around the counter. The owner didn't try to stop me. He simply turned away. wiping the already clean metal with a frayed rag. His indifference felt worse than a threat. Fluorescent lights hummed louder as I pushed through a swinging door into darkness smelling of wet stone and old herbs. Bare bulbs, spaced erratically along the ceiling, lit a corridor narrow enough that my shoulders brushed walls tiled in cracked jade. Each bulb flickered at a different rhythm, creating stuttering strobes that warped depth. My shadow jittered ahead like something broken. Grease lingered underfoot, thick as moss. Every few steps I glimpsed a faint lilac wisp curling up the corridor, drifting through seams in the tiles, as though the diner itself breathed memories like smoke. I passed steel shelves packed with mason jars. Inside floated scraps of paper, photographs, lockets, ticket stubs, mementos suspended in cloudy liquid. When I edged closer, letters on the paper blurred into static. Faces in photos dissolved to white shapes. Heat pulsed behind my eyes, and I stepped back, heart tripping. Cold sweat rolled down my temple. At the corridor's dead end, a rusted door hung ajar. I nudged it. Hinges squealed, grinding like teeth. The kitchen beyond sat drowned in dim red emergency light. Ovens lined one wall. All were cold. The center held a battered oak table blanketed with parchments, butcher knives, and a stained ledger thick as a dictionary. The air felt denser here, sweet and rotten at once, making each breath stick. I flipped the ledger open. Handwriting slanted across brittle pages, recipes etched in dark ink that shimmered purple under the red lamp. Lines read like invocations more than instructions. Spoonful of unspoken guilt, half cup of forgotten promises. Simmer until silence thickens. Words swam on the page, refusing focus. My pulse thundered in my ears. I realized I was forgetting how I'd gotten here, why I needed the recipe, even what road I'd driven earlier. Desperation jolted me. Friction peeled along my teeth. I tasted copper. I forced myself to scan ingredients, searching for reversal phrases. One section bore a jagged header. To return, the taste. Beneath it, 3 steps appeared, each harder to read than the last, letters drifting like smoke. My lips moved, sounding them out. Not prayers this time, but crude instructions. Boil the special with a shard of self-awareness. Stir counterclockwise with open eyes. Consume before steam cools. I needed a shard of myself, something tied to memory. Handshaking, I patted pockets until fingers closed on my wallet. I pulled out a cracked Polaroid, me and my brother holding a busted guitar on our parents' porch. For an instant, his name hovered on my lips, then slid away like soap in water. I cursed under my breath, barely remembering the photo at all, but I tore off a corner and dropped it into a dented saucepan. I ladled a portion of the still warm chowder from a nearby pot, the surface already curling violet. The liquid hissed on contact with the photo scrap, steam turning deeper purple, rising in urgent swirls. My head swam. Thoughts slipped sideways, words looping back on themselves. I stirred with a wooden spoon, fighting vertigo. The recipe demanded open eyes. Eyelids trembled with exhaustion. As I stirred counterclockwise, shadows along the walls stretched, contorting into tall forms with no faces. They leaned closer, arms like thin branches. I told myself they were tricks of failing vision and the pulsing red bulb, but ice crawled my spine. Breath rasped, lungs stuttering. When the mixture thickened, I tipped the saucepan to my lips. Steam flooded my face, damp and burning. The first swallow scalded tongue and throat, yet cold flooded veins immediately after, a bizarre clash that made me gag. I forced another mouthful, heart slamming, hands locked on the handle. A sharp jolt hit between my eyes, as though someone yanked a cable connected to every buried recollection. Images detonated behind my eyelids. My brother shouting lyrics into a cheap microphone, a birthday cake melting candles onto a porch table, the taste of chalk dust from grade school erasers. Names snapped back. Mom, Dad, Ben. Relief hammered through me so hard my knees buckled. I braced against the table, gasping. But new memories crowded in that weren't mine. A teenage girl scribbling secrets in diary margins, A stranger crying in a phone booth, an old man burning letters beside a lake. Random, vivid fragments jammed into my skull, overlapping my own past. I realized the chowder had returned what the diner had taken, but it had poured other people's secrets inside me too. My stomach flipped. Pressure built behind eyes. I felt like a balloon overfilled with mismatched lives, ready to tear. I wiped sweat from my brow. Skin came away smeared faint violet. The owner's silhouette filled the doorway, frame haloed by sick amber from the dining room. He didn't step in. He only watched, head cocked, as though measuring how much of me remained. I expected anger but saw something colder, curiosity. An understanding tremor shook me. He never stopped anyone from stealing the recipe. He wanted witnesses, carriers, vessels. I backed away, knocking the saucepan to the floor. Violet broth splashed across tiles, sizzling like acid. Memory shards glittered in the puddle. The owner spoke once, voice low, even. Every cook needs tasters. The words slithered over my skin. Adrenaline seized me. I shoved past him, shoulder hitting his solid frame, like pushing against a door that decides to open. He didn't resist. I burst into the dining room. Fluorescence blazed white now, humming like a nest of hornets. The dish on the counter had emptied itself, leaving only silver residue. Vapor still coiled from it, feeding overhead vents. My lungs tightened with chemical sweetness. I staggered to the exit. The bell above the door screamed as it clanged. Night air slapped my face, cold and real. Tires screeched on gravel as I fumbled keys, engine roaring to life. I floored the gas. The diner receded in the rearview mirror, neon sign flickering from violet to dead black. For miles, the desert road lay empty, but for my headlights, carving endless dark. Moments stretched, sweat dried on my skin, leaving salt crust. Memories unraveled and rewove behind my eyes, my own mixed with others. I whispered my name aloud, grounding myself in the sound, yet echoes inside repeated different names, foreign accents. Paranoia crawled. Was the road looping? Were mountains shifting? I gripped the wheel until knuckles bleached. When dawn finally bled over the horizon, I pulled into a rest stop. Hands shook so badly I could hardly turn the key off. I studied my reflection in the dusty rear view. The face stared back familiar yet off, as though small details had been redrawn by someone who'd only read descriptions. Eyes looked older, or younger. Hard to tell. Inside my jacket pocket I found the torn ledger page. Ingredients smeared, instructions blurred by steam, yet still legible. Proof the night happened. Proof I had stolen something that would never fully belong to me. A faint lilac glow stained the paper's edges, pulsing with each beat of my heart. I sit here now, writing these lines to anchor myself. I remember my brother's laughter, my mother's perfume, the diner's buzzing lights, the taste of secrets simmered in forbidden broth. I also remember kneeling by a lake I've never visited, burning letters I've never written. Both sets of memories feel equally real, threads knotted together. I don't know how long before the fragments shift again, before another person's guilt or desire swells louder than my own thoughts. Maybe the recipe can be tested, refined, reversed more cleanly. Or maybe the owner knew there was no way back once tasted, that the dish is a door you walk through in bites, leaving bits of yourself behind on the plate. The page in my hand pulses. My heart answers, fast and unsteady. Somewhere on the horizon, a strip of highway shimmers under rising heat. I could drive until fuel runs dry, trying to outrun borrowed memories bleeding into my mind. But roads loop, like prayers whispered over chowder, and secrets always want new mouths to chew them. The sun climbs, turning violet edges of the page to dull gray. Yet when I breathe out, a thin lilac mist still curls from my lips before dissolving in the dawn air. I'm not sure whose memory just escaped. I only know it was part of me, whether original or acquired, and it's gone for good. Somewhere, a dusty diner waits with a flickering sign. Somewhere, a man in a stained coat practices recipes that erase and refill lives. And somewhere inside my own head, Rooms of borrowed thoughts creak open, inviting me to explore or be consumed. I grip the wheel again, knuckles white, heartbeat rattling in my chest. The road stretches empty, silent, and far too familiar. Story 6. Knew the place was wrong the moment my tires left the pavement and rolled onto the uneven dirt track that cut through fields of waist-high weeds. The afternoon sun had been bright when I left town, but by the time the farmhouse emerged, leaning, blistered, its paint flaking like old scabs, clouds had thickened overhead, turning everything the flat color of wet cement. I killed the engine and sat for a beat, fingers tapping the steering wheel in a jittery rhythm that matched the hiccuping thud of my pulse. My breath fogged the windshield even though the ambient air felt warm. The mist seemed to bleed straight from my lungs, as if my body already feared what waited beyond the cracked glass. I was here because the county records flagged the address. No phone, no utilities, no public contact in years. Yet someone had submitted a welfare inquiry. An anonymous note scrawled in shaky pen. Residents isolated. Possible abuse. Please send help. As the new social services liaison, I could have kicked the case upstairs. But curiosity, and a still fresh sense of duty, dragged me out to the farm. Authority came with a badge and clipboard. Neither felt like armor now. Stepping onto the porch, I noticed the wood spongy underfoot. A porch swing hung lopsided, its chains creaking even without wind. Each creak landed inside my chest like a dropped coin. The front door stood half open, inviting or threatening. It was hard to decide. I announced myself, voice too loud in the hush, then crossed the threshold with hesitant, heel-first steps. The interior light, if it could be called that, was the murk of dust motes drifting in thick, stagnant air. Furniture sat in odd clusters, a sofa facing a wardrobe, a dining chair angled at a vanity, all surfaces polished to mirror shine. Not glass mirrors, actual reflective plating laminated onto wood. Their gleam produced an unsettling effect, multiplying the room into warped versions of itself. In every reflection I caught flickers of movement, shoulders, a blurred face, a hand that didn't match my posture. Yet whenever I spun around, the space behind me remained empty. My heart ratcheted up. Sweat prickled along my hairline and slid cold down my spine. I scanned for rational causes, maybe squatters with a fondness for mirrored decor, while my rationality shrank by the second. I took one step deeper. A hush seemed to draw breath. Then a murmur brushed my ear from nowhere, the words sliding under my skin like ice water. Trade flesh. Keep the shine. I froze. The floorboards vibrated with a hum too low for hearing. Felt more than heard, a throat clearing beneath my boots. I backed toward the doorway, but another whisper slithered from a dresser to my left, as though the wood itself had lips. One step, one sliver. We bargain? My pulse hammered. The clipboard trembled in my grasp. Paper edges scraped my sweaty palm. I forced myself to conduct the routine. Inspect, document, verify occupancy. The sooner I finished, the sooner I could bolt. So I pressed forward, each footfall deliberate. Every step drew a new susurrus, voices weaving together into a swarm of haggling tones. Some coaxing, some pleading, some edged with hunger. They repeated variations of the same offer, a swap, my physical presence for the residual image I cast on their mirrored skin. Ridiculous, I told myself, but the notion lodged in me anyway, a splinter too fine to extract. In the kitchen, cabinets lined with reflective panels made me feel like I was moving inside an insect's compound eye. Shadows puffed at the corners of those reflections, growing clearer the longer I stared. Silhouettes of people standing behind me. None looked directly at me. Instead, they studied some point over my shoulder as if monitoring a parallel scene that excluded me entirely. When I pivoted, the room stayed empty, but the hairs on my arms rose, tin charges crackling across damp skin. My breathing turned shallow. I had to remind myself to inhale slow, exhale slower. I tried calling out again, framing it as gentle outreach, standard social worker cadence. but my voice stammered, an uneven rasp that betrayed my fear. The only reply was the chorus of murmurs huddling closer. I was certain the words said, "Give us the shell, keep the echo." I retreated into the hallway, aiming for a back exit, and there the voices escalated. The hallway floor comprised alternating slats of wood and narrow mirrored strips. As my shoe landed on each reflective board, the surface rippled like disturbed water, and a whisper burst free, louder, urgent. My vision doubled. Vertigo lurched inside my skull. For an instant I wondered if each step peeled away some intangible layer. My vitality, my tether to the tangible world. Panic ballooned, constricting my ribcage. Breath came in ragged, quick bursts. I needed space, daylight, anything normal. The back door stuck, but eventually surrendered to a shove, opening onto a yard choked by tall ryegrass. Across that sea of green, a weather-beaten barn sagged under rust-red tin roofing. I stumbled toward it, boots snagging weeds, my balance off from adrenaline. The air smelled of damp soil and some faint electrical tang, like an old battery left in rain. Inside, the barn was dim but mercifully mirror-free. Shafts of hazy light leaked through gaps in the siding, stippling the dirt floor. Along one wall, stacked neatly, lay long plastic tubes, fluorescent lanterns, the portable kind powered by chunky batteries. Yellow tags on their handles read, "Evacuation use." I flicked one on. The bulb buzzed alive in sharp white glare, humming only a fraction less ominously than the whispers inside the house. Yet I felt relief bloom. Light, even artificial, always felt like a shield. I tested another, then another, until I held 3 bright beams. Their combined glow painted solid shapes where shadows had reigned, a fragile veneer of safety. But safety was relative. From the farmhouse doorway, I heard the collective voice, no longer a scattered whisper, but a single coalesced utterance. "Bring us out. Carry the bargain." The sound wasn't airborne. It vibrated along my bones, pulsing with my heartbeat. My mouth dried to parchment. A tremor shook my grip on the lanterns. Still, I sensed leverage. The voices wanted something they couldn't achieve alone. They needed help crossing a threshold. Maybe literal, maybe metaphorical. If I guided them out, perhaps they'd release their claim. Or perhaps they'd simply claim me outside instead of inside. The gamble tasted metallic on my tongue, like biting foil. Yet standing frozen meant eventual surrender to panic. Action, however desperate, felt marginally better. I strapped 2 lanterns over my shoulders with rope found on a peg, their beams fanning ahead and behind, and clutched the third as a handheld torch. The brightness stabbed the gloom as I re-entered the house. The reflective boards quivered under the flood of light, silver surfaces boiling as if heated. The whispers shrank to thin gasps. I advanced, steady, sweeping the beam left and right. When the light touched a mirror, the lurking silhouettes recoiled, dissolving into grainy static that skidded along the surface toward the ground. The voices hissed protests. "Not that way. Turn the light away." I ignored them, heart racing so hard it blurred my vision with each thud. Sweat cascaded down my ribs beneath my shirt, the fabric clinging cold to my skin. I created a path, room to hall, hall to foyer, placing lanterns on the floor at intervals. With every new pool of glare, the reflections writhed, funneling along the mirrored skirting boards like oil retreating from flame. I herded them, inch by inch, toward the open front door. Their tone shifted from negotiation to desperation, then to threat. "Your reflection already glimmers in our glass," they warned. "You are half here. Finish the trade." A trickle of dread slid down the back of my throat. I risked glancing at a sideboard mirror not yet flooded with light. My reflection lingered there, but its eyes were glazed, skull-deep, as if light were leaking out from sockets. The skin seemed dimmer than the room, like film exposed for too long. I recoiled, breath hitching high in my chest. My knees wobbled. I forced focus back to the doorway. Outside, dusk had settled, making the yard a sheet of gray-violet. I stepped onto the porch and set the last lantern at the threshold. its beam pointed inward, a lighthouse to guide the nightmare tide outward. The mirror panels closest to the door convulsed, bulging as though something behind them pushed against silver laminate. A low roar vibrated through the wooden frame, the house resenting eviction. Then the silhouettes broke free, not as corporeal shapes but as streaks of reflective shimmer, like mercury poured too fast. They flowed along the lantern glow, sliding across floorboards, down porch steps, into open air. As they crossed into dusk, their forms lost coherence, scattering in faint glints that rose like fireflies, then winked out. The voices faded with them, dwindling to a distant rustle, then nothing. Silence rolled in, heavy and absolute. My body sagged as tension unwound, leaving muscles shaking with hot aftershocks. I inhaled deep, but the breath stuttered, catching on residual terror. Night insects chirped cautiously, as if testing the quiet. I dared a glance through the doorway. The interior mirrors now reflected only the rooms, the real, abandoned rooms. No rogue figures. Relief curled through me, but uncertainty dogged its heels. I retrieved the lantern from the threshold, and compelled by some stubborn need for proof, turned it toward the hallway floor. The mirrored slats, once turbulent, lay still. Yet when I stepped forward, I felt no give beneath my boot, because I cast no reflection at all. My silhouette, my colors, my shape, gone from the silver. The surface showed only ceiling rafters and hanging cobwebs. A chill sheeted through me, deeper than before, as if the night air had funneled straight into my marrow. I hurried back outside, clutching the lantern like a weapon. The sky had fully darkened, starless, moonless. Horizon smeared the same blank charcoal as the fallow fields. I lifted the lamp to my face and, though it lit me clearly, I couldn't see myself in the barn's metal siding, only empty sky rippling over rusted steel. The trade, it seemed, had concluded after all. They left, yes, but took something intangible, an image, a duplicate skin I'd never know missing until I searched for it. I was intact in every practical sense. Heartbeat strong, lungs working, sweat drying in the cooling air. Yet part of me, no longer tethered to light, would never reappear. I backed toward my car, shoes crunching gravel loud enough to confirm physical presence. Each breath steamed visible in headlamp glow. The farmhouse loomed behind, silent and inert, but its pitch-dark windows gleamed faintly, like distant mirrors catching unknown stars. I drove away without looking back again, afraid some remnant reflection might be following, sliding across surfaces to reclaim the rest of me. And now, days later, every time I pass a storefront window or angle past a bathroom mirror, I brace for absence. Sometimes I see myself, solid, normal, undeniable. Sometimes the glass stares blankly, reflecting only the world behind me. In those moments, a hush brushes my ear, like breath on glass. I strain to hear whether it bargains anew, but the words remain indistinct, hovering just outside understanding, waiting for the right light to speak. Story 7. The first thing that warned me we had left familiar territory was the silence. Tires whispered over cracked asphalt, and the usual night chirp of insects seemed smothered by a thick, invisible blanket. My girlfriend, Mara, dozed against the passenger window, strands of hair plastered to the glass by the humid breath of a summer storm that refused to break. Headlights slashed through a narrow curve carved into the hillside, an elbow of road with sheer forest on one side, and a drop into reeds on the other. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened, sensing I had driven straight into a pocket of air that did not belong to any map. When the beam caught shifting shapes ahead, I braked hard. The engine's growl fractured the quiet, then died into an anxious idle. 4 figures blocked the lane. They wore antique carnival masks, cracked porcelain, fading paint, metallic filigree dulled by years. Each mask held a frozen grin too wide for a human mouth. Their clothes were plain black coats, hems brushing the asphalt as though they floated. I felt my pulse hammer behind my ears. the drum of blood outpacing the wiper blades. Mara startled awake, asking in a half-dream what was wrong. I muttered that we weren't alone. She followed my gaze and stiffened, hands flattening on the dash. Instinct told me to reverse, yet every muscle locked. The figures did not raise weapons or demand wallets. Instead, two stepped aside while the other pair advanced, arms extended. In gloved hands, they carried hourglasses the length of a forearm, glass swollen at the center like a lung mid-inhale. Fine silver sand churned within, but the hourglasses rotated on their own axes, spinning with the lazy certainty of planets. No human fingers directed them. I rolled down my window only an inch. The lead figure inclined his mask, the gesture polite, almost courtly, and presented the hourglass through the gap. Its glass face caught my headlight and flashed an image that was not a reflection. Inside the swirling particles appeared Mara and me, still seated in this very car, yet overrun by ivy, windshields coated in moss. We were frozen, mouths parted as though speaking, but unmoving. Trees behind us had grown thick enough to strangle the road. The scene vanished as the sand tumbled. My throat dried to paper. Mara whispered that the other masked stranger held a twin device, sand painting a similar vision. Our silhouettes pacing the shoulder endlessly, clutching each other, unable to step off the curve. The figures offered the objects like gifts, no menace in their posture, yet all menace in their stillness. A damp breeze carried the faint rattle of glass tapping gloves. I tried to reason aloud. Maybe they were performers, pranksters. My words tasted thin. The leader tilted his head again, urging me to take the hourglass. I imagined refusing, flooring the gas. But my foot might as well have fused to the mat. The wheel felt welded in place. The car, the curve, and the night had collapsed into a single pocket where only one decision could be made. I reached through the gap. The glass chilled my palm with a breath colder than weather. The hourglass ceased spinning the instant I gripped it, and the sand stilled at midpoint, suspended. The leader stepped back. A humming rose in my inner ear, like voltage traveling marrow. I asked what they wanted. My voice trembled. The reply never came in speech I could record. Instead, awareness seeped into my thoughts, an intrusive narrator whispering terms. Trade us an hour of your present, and you may drive on. Refuse, and you repeat the bend forever, time coiling back on itself until surrender. Acceptance meant escape, yet the cost was the anchor of now. Memories would smear, moments bleed together, the future slipped loose. I stared at Mara. Panic quivered in her pupils, reflecting dim taillight flare. She touched the hourglass. The sand glimmered violet, showing a fresh tableau. Our car rolling beyond the curve under crescent dawn, but our faces vague, eyes unfocused, as though names and dates had dissolved. A choice woven in dust. My heartbeat thudded so hard my ribs hurt. Sweat trickled down my spine, cold despite the vaporous heat. I heard night animals again, yet the sounds warped, echoing from odd angles. The masked quartet remained statues, waiting. We had spoken perhaps 20 words, yet dialogue felt too loud, too solid. Mara's breathing accelerated, short, shallow bursts. I thought of turning off the ignition and running, but the curve was narrow, railings rusted through. Besides, the unseen narrator reminded, distance means nothing when the clock loops. I squeezed the hourglass. Fine cracks spidered over the surface, not breaking, only mapping new lines. The sand slid to the lower bulb, and with it fell an hour I would never perceive. A chill tunneled through my veins, rearranging recollection. I remembered the first kilometers of tonight's drive with cinematic clarity. Moments after accepting the trade, that memory faded like smoke, leaving only a wistful outline. Mara gasped. She had felt it too, grabbing her temples. The masks dipped in synchronous approval. Two figures stepped aside, clearing the lane. The leader tipped an unseen hat and withdrew into shadow, glass crunching faintly under their shoes, though no shards had fallen. I turned the key. The engine responded, but its growl sounded distant, as though I listened from inside a tunnel. We rolled forward. Tires crossed the spot where they had stood. Not a scuff remained. My chest loosened with false relief, until I noticed the dashboard clock skipping. 1:14 a.m. flickered to 1:44, then back to 1:29. The radio screen glitched between songs that never finished. I clenched the wheel, knuckles blanching. Mara asked whether we should pull over somewhere lit. Her words slurred at their ends, as though tape sped up, then slowed. I answered, uncertain if speech arrived intact. The air outside thickened. High beams illuminated mist spiraling upward like breath from hidden mouths. Another kilometer passed, or maybe the same, before realization struck. Road signs repeated, a bent mile marker, a spray-painted guardrail scar. My peripheral vision caught the broken branch I had noticed earlier. We had moved, yet place refused to change. Anxiety crawled up my throat. I pressed the pedal harder. Trees blurred, but the curve looped back into view, headlights carving the identical elbow. The hourglass on Mara's lap rattled despite being upright. Sand jittered, revealing flashes. Our car spinning in place, us banging on windows, chronology unspooling like ribbon. My temples pounded. Breath came ragged. A metallic taste flooded my mouth, fear so sharp I thought I might bite through my tongue. I slammed the brakes. Gravel spat. We skidded to the shoulder where frogs croaked out of sync with their own echoes. I grabbed the hourglass, tempted to hurl it into the ravine. The glass warm now, pulsing like a heartbeat. The sand reversed direction on its own, crawling upward. With each grain, my senses warped. The forest tilted. Stars smeared across sky as if wet paint dragged by invisible fingers. Mara clutched my arm, nails digging, eyes wide but unfocused. She couldn't recall the exit we took onto this highway, or the gas station coffee earlier. Pieces of the evening were dissolving. I forced myself to concentrate on tactile anchors. The steering wheel's leather pattern under sweaty palms, the seat seam pressing my thigh, the faint vibration of the engine. Present, I told myself. Remain in the present. But the present had become too slippery. Above the tree line, a low hum rose, converging with the inner ear throb that began when I first touched the glass. I glimpsed for an instant, faint lantern glows deeper among the trunks, the masked figures pacing parallel, shepherding our loop. A revelation hit like cold water. We had accepted only one hourglass, Mara and I as a pair, but two had been offered. The trade-in complete left the loop unstable, halfway collapsed. The forest, the curve, time itself frayed like rope under strain. To escape fully, we might need the second device or sever the bargain entirely. Mara murmured that she could still see, behind closed lids, another hourglass hanging in darkness, sand suspended, waiting. Her knuckles whitened around mine. Sweat chilled her skin. I envisioned turning back, searching the shoulder for the quartet. Yet intuition warned they would appear only when it suited them, not when summoned. Lightning flickered without thunder, illuminating the masks briefly among the trees, each visage staring through leaf gaps. They carried no hourglasses now. Instead, one pointed a slow finger to the curve ahead, as if reminding us of the path. I breathed through burning lungs, shifted into drive. The car rolled, gravel groaned under tires. The curve approached again. I felt adrenaline spike, a wave of tingling static from scalp to fingertips. This time, as we entered the bend, I eased off the gas and closed my eyes for half a second, concentrating on the sensation of forward momentum. When I opened them, the road ahead branched. A slip road I had not seen before, narrow, its surface cobbled and ancient. Mara saw it too, nodding through tears. We veered onto the spur. Instantly the humming dulled. The masked figures receded, swallowed by shadow. The dashboard clock froze at 2:02 a.m., then powered off. Only engine noise remained, raw and immediate. A relief fluttered in my chest, but memory of the masked bargain slid away like water off glass. I knew we had given something, though the specifics scattered. Kilometers, or minutes, later, we emerged onto a straight highway bathed in violet dawn. The sky glowed preternaturally bright, yet my watch insisted it was still night. Mara whispered that her name felt foreign on her tongue, syllables detached from meaning. I experienced the same displacement. My own voice echoed inside my skull with a stranger's timbre. We drove until a service station appeared, lights humming. Inside, patrons sipped coffee, flipping newspapers whose dates I could not read. Letters rearranged themselves, refusing to settle. I realized with cold certainty that while we had moved beyond the curve, our sense of ongoing now had fractured. Memories formed, but seconds later they blurred into soft focus, as though someone kept erasing pencil lines before ink could dry. Outside, the hourglass lay upside down on the dashboard, sand balanced at midpoint, frozen between past and future. It would never empty. The cost of forward motion had been the anchor of continuity. We could travel any road, yet the present would slide, untethered, time experienced like glimpsing frames of film out of order. As we pulled away from the station, a radio ad crackled, promising endless summer nights. The irony stung. In the rear view, I saw no masked figures, no twisted forest. But sometimes, in peripheral vision, porcelain smiles glimmer at the edge of trees, silently counting grains that will never settle. Now I tell this while I still recall the curve in full. By the time the final sentence ends, half the drive will have smudged, details running like wet ink. I cling to the remaining fragments, the chill of glass, the roar of panicked blood, the way the sand painted our captivity. I do not know if we escaped or merely traded one loop for another, stretched across every road we take. Yet the hourglass stays silent, balanced, daring me to watch long enough to see which bulb truly holds the future, and which secretly devours the present we have already forgotten. Story 8. The first flash of light hit my rear-view mirror like a silent siren, a dense strip of highway cut through the flatlands, black as a shut-eye after midnight. But that rusty 18-wheeler behind me shone with a brightness that felt radioactive. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sweat prickled across my shoulders, even though the air conditioning still spat cool air. I wasn't speeding, yet my pulse thrashed as if I'd sprinted 100 yards. Another pulse. Long, short. Morse, my brain supplied, dredging up half-forgotten scout lessons. Headlights as code. My sedan's cabin filled with that white glare, each burst burning the silhouette of the rig into my retinas. Cracked grille, dented bumper, paint the color of dried blood under dust. Every interval felt deliberate, measured, intentional. For the first hour, I shrugged it off as a bored trucker entertaining himself. By the second, the signals formed patterns too exact to ignore. While asphalt ribboned ahead of me in endless night, I tapped the rhythm against the steering wheel, translating with growing dread. The letters demanded coordinates, northings and eastings that curved into numbers that refused to fit any grid on my phone's map. The latitude read fine, but the longitude stretched past the edge of the globe, an impossible place. The radio was dead static. Even switching bands gave only a hiss that sounded like breathing caught in metal teeth. My gas gauge ticked cruelly toward empty. I tasted copper on my tongue, nerves flooding my mouth with metallic tang. Dylan, dozing in the passenger seat, stirred. He muttered that maybe we should pull over and see if the rig wanted to pass. I told him, voice flat, that the driver could have overtaken 100 times. This wasn't about traffic. This was about message. Dylan frowned but slumped again, headphones back in, unaware that each mile peeled another layer off my sanity. I pressed harder on the accelerator, engine whining. The truck remained an arm's length behind, perfectly matching speed, beams never missing a beat in their cryptic dit-da pulse. My spine buzzed. Every glance in the mirror felt like staring into a tunnel lit by surgical lamps. Road signs blurred past, except suddenly they didn't. Exits disappeared, mile markers replaced by blank posts leaning like broken fingers. Only one sign remained, a cracked board reading, "Last stop to my." Nothing more. No brand logo, no gas icon, just the warning. My gaslight winked orange. When the station appeared, it looked fossilized in time. One crooked canopy, two ancient pumps, an office without lights. No other cars, no distant glow of houses. I swerved in, tires crunching over gravel. The truck rolled in behind me and parked at the opposite island, engine idling so low it sounded subterranean. Its headlights shut off. Darkness swallowed us both except for the sodium lamp above my pump, flickering, humming like an insect trapped behind glass. I stepped out. Night air felt thick as syrup, heavy with diesel fumes and something sweeter, rotting. Every hair on my arm stood at attention. The pump's digital display was dead. I yanked the handle anyway, nothing. I slammed it back. The rig across the lot rumbled, a sound deeper than thunder, and its headlights flashed once. Long, short, short. My chest constricted, then the digits on my pump flared to life, neon green. They scrolled letters instead of numbers. MICHAELHAWKINS. My full name, impossible and obscene on a gas display. I jerked back, heart drumming in my throat. Sweat slid down my spine, soaking my shirt. The display wiped clean and rewrote, FUELYN. I swallowed, tasted rust. The rig's engine revved, my skin tingled, memory flickering, an image of my mother's face at a birthday I could suddenly not place. Year, age, gone. Panic tightened around my ribs. The pump wrote again, NEXTMILE, ANGT 1MEMORY. Behind the cracked glass of the office, a single fluorescent tube sputtered to life, then died. I imagined shapes moving between shadows, watching. The world felt paper thin, ready to tear. The pump offered two options now, alternating in jittery ASCII, ECODIESELU. RUNDRY, Dylan called from the car, voice muffled, asking why my name was on the pump. I couldn't answer. My throat felt packed with sand. Breath came ragged, chest hitching. If I drove off, I would lose memories 1 kilometer at a time. The pump promised that, with a logic colder than any threat. If I fueled with whatever eco-diesel was, I might anchor myself to these coordinates that shouldn't exist. A distant insect scream sliced through the air. No, tires on asphalt. I spun. The truck was moving, creeping in a slow circle around the lot, headlights dark, only the dim red glow of taillights pulsing like arteries. As it circled, gravel shifted, sounding like bones grinding. I smelled scorched rubber and old hay, an odor that had no business clinging to a tractor trailer. I pulled the nozzle, pressed the lone green button glowing faintly under Eco. The hose shuddered. A liquid thicker than normal diesel oozed into my tank with a slow glug-glug. The smell rose sharp and chemical, mixed with pine and ozone. My stomach flipped. On the display, my name vanished, replaced by coordinates again. Same impossible longitude, repeating like a mantra. Fueling finished at exactly 1313 liters, though my tank was near empty. The nozzle clicked. I forced it back into the cradle. My pulse drummed at my temples. Dylan stepped out, saw the viscous green smear on the filler neck, recoiled. He asked if it was safe. I told him we had no choice, voice cracking on choice. He shivered, got back inside. Engine on, I rolled toward the exit. The truck halted, blocking the driveway, grill inches from my bumper. Headlights blazed, strobing. Geo, in Morse. My breath hitched. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging. I nudged forward. The rig eased backwards, clearing a gap just wide enough. The highway swallowed us again. My odometer recalibrated, numbers sliding into nonsense, then counting. Backwards. I felt something slip behind my eyes, a thread snapping. I tried to recall Dylan's face at graduation. Blank. He tapped my arm, concerned, but his words blurred like underwater echoes. Each kilometer ticked. and another fragment of my life fluttered loose. Childhood summers dissolved. First job, gone. The steering wheel vibrated, or maybe my hands shook. I glimpsed new signs, not markers, but metal sheets stamped with the impossible coordinates, hammered into dirt at perfect intervals. The world past the guardrails looked smeared, as if a painter left turpentine to run down the canvas. Lanes multiplied, then funneled into a single strip leading nowhere on the map. The radio static shifted, shaping itself into patterns that matched the truck's lights, a symphony of code playing directly into my skull. Dylan pointed ahead, mouth moving in alarm, but the sound came from behind me, delayed. My chest burned. Breath felt like breathing through gauze soaked in ice water. I knew if I stopped, I might forget why brakes existed, so I drove faster, the car quaking. Out of the darkness, the coordinates manifested in physical form, a colossal sign arcing over the road, digits glowing with the sick green of the eco-fuel. As I passed under, every memory of high school drained in a cold rush, leaving behind hollow placeholders. I clenched the wheel until tendons screamed. Beyond the archway lay a vast concrete circle, lit by floodlights floating on poles with no cords. In the center, a spiral of parking bays, each occupied by a copy of my car. Different colors, plates, decades, but unmistakably the same make and model. Engines idling in unison. I tasted bile, stomach knotting. Dylan whispered that he had seen this place in a dream he no longer remembered fully. Tears glittered in his eyes, though he didn't know why. The truck rumbled up behind, idled to a stop at the circle's rim. Its horn bellowed once, the sound so deep my bones vibrated. On its trailer door, fresh paint glistened. Refuel complete. Follow memory route. Letters dripped like oil. I eased into the spiral. Each twin vehicle's driver's seat was empty. Yet I felt watched from every windshield, as if versions of myself sat invisible but present, cataloging what I would do next. My breath shortened to quick, shallow gasps. Fingers tingled with pins and needles. At the center of the spiral lay a pedestal bearing a single cracked compass, needle rotating wildly. Next to it, a pump nozzle identical to the one at the station dripping green. The hose disappeared into the concrete. A plaque beneath read, "One fill, one remaining life." I recoiled, heart hammering. The truck's headlights blinked. Entire convoy now. Dozens of rigs around the circle, each flashing, "Choose" over and over in unison. I understood then. The eco-diesel had bought space but not freedom. It tethered me to this junction outside cartography, a place stitched between coordinates that shouldn't coexist. Refusing meant erosion, a kilometer at a time, until I no longer recognized the steering wheel or my own face. Accepting meant staying, fueling the next arrival, maybe becoming the silent driver behind someone else. Memory of my mother singing a lullaby flickered, fixed itself, then hovered on the brink of collapse. I clutched that fragile image like a talisman. Somewhere below the concrete, a reservoir sloshed, waiting. I killed the engine. Silence cascaded, heavy and absolute. Dylan stared at me, pupils wide, breathing ragged. I told him, voice barely more than breath, that if we stayed together, we might hold on to something real. He nodded, though I doubted he recalled my name. I stepped from the car, legs trembling, tongue glued to the roof of my mouth. Floodlights hummed. The air smelled of ozone and wintergreen. As I approached the pedestal, the compass needle froze, pointing true north for the first time. A path opened in the circle, cars parting without engines or drivers, leaving an exit lane bathed in darkness. An unspoken offer. I reached for the dripping nozzle, then stopped. My palms were slick with sweat, heart pounding loud enough to drown the distant growl of idling rigs. I glanced at Dylan, saw him clutching the dashboard, whispering fragments of a prayer he'd forgotten halfway through. Another flash of memory loss rippled. My birthday left me. I inhaled sharp, tasted hot metal. I turned from the nozzle and slid back behind the wheel. The path out felt like the only road that still belonged to the world where maps held meaning. As I accelerated down that lane, floodlights winked out behind me in domino sequence. The convoy of trucks did not follow. They merely watched, eyes of steel and halogen. Miles later, the road merged onto a familiar highway. Billboards appeared, then gas prices, then a town's glow on the horizon. Yet my odometer still ran backward. The radio found a station, but every song sounded half-remembered, lyrics missing. Dylan asked where we were headed. The name of the city tasted foreign in my mouth. I kept driving, fuel gauge fixed at the same eerie level, neither draining nor full. Somewhere out there, that spiral waited for our return, or for someone else to decode the impossible coordinates. Each mile we borrowed felt like a shaky truce, memories fraying, but not yet severed. I drove beneath a sky that looked normal, but I knew better. The stars had shifted. Constellations spelled things I refused to translate. The truck no longer chased us, but its echo lived in every headlight that flared behind, every rumble on distant asphalt. Heartbeats remained fast, palms damp, mouth dry, a body forever on edge, anticipating a flash of Morse that would call our names again. Sometimes, when the road grows empty and the moon dips below the horizon, Dylan swears he hears pumps clicking in the dark, counting liters of a fuel that glows green. I tell him it's wind. I tell myself the same, but the odometer still counts backward. And memory, my own name, the scent of my mother's perfume, feels thinner each morning, like paper worn translucent between nervous fingers. I keep the tank half full. I avoid truck stops haloed by lonely lamps. Yet in rear-view mirrors, I occasionally glimpse coordinates burning where taillights should be, bright as a brand on my retina. The choice they offered wasn't a crossroads, it was a loop, and one day I'll find myself circling back. Until then, I drive, knuckles white, breathing shallow, waiting for the next impossible sign to flicker awake. And every time a headlight blinks long, short behind me, my heart lurches, afraid the road has finally decided to collect what it lent. Story 9. The first flash arrived at 2:03 a.m. A thin cardboard envelope slid under my apartment door like a pale tongue. I hadn't ordered prints in years, so curiosity cut through my fatigue. When I lifted the flap, a single glossy photograph slipped into my hand. Me, hunched over my desk in the dark, the LED from my router flickering behind my left ear. The angle was impossible. The shot hovered 3 meters above and behind me, exactly where the ceiling hung unbroken. My scalp tightened until it prickled. I stared at the print. The exposure was perfect, the focus cruel. Every pore on my neck, every loose thread on the collar of my t-shirt, even the tremor in my fingertip as I zoomed into the image with my mind's eye, frozen with forensic clarity. My pulse thumped once, loud in the hush, then galloped. The apartment's silence pressed against my eardrums like water at depth. I flung open drawers until I found a lighter. A plastic Bic, summer camp yellow, the wheels stiff. I held the photo by one corner, flicked sparks until the flame hissed alive, and set the edge alight. The glossy stock curled, blistered, blackened. Acrid fumes stung my nostrils, but I watched until only flakes drifted into the trash can. Relief lasted half a breath. The envelope lay on the floor again, flat and innocent. Inside waited the same photograph, but now it captured the moment of burning. My arm extended, lighter blooming, embers tracing orange veins toward the lens. The timestamp in the lower border read 2:06 a.m., the minute I destroyed the first copy. The universe had printed the act of erasure onto fresh paper. A sheen of sweat cooled on my spine. I locked the door chain, bolted it, deadbolted it, even jammed a chair under the knob. The iron taste of panic pooled under my tongue. Every object in the apartment turned suspect. The mirror by the entry, the cheap smoke detector's dull eye, the TV's blank black screen reflecting me in miniature. My heartbeat drummed against the cartilage of my ribs. At 2:18 a.m., the second envelope arrived. I heard it whisper across the hardwood. Inside, 3 photos. 1. Me, crouched over the trash can, lighter in hand, smoke coiling. 2. A wide shot of my bedroom from near the ceiling, showing a lump in the sheets that might have been me, except I was in the hallway when it was taken. 3. A vacant corner of the living room wall, but the drywall looked bruised, as if shadowed by a rectangular outline the size of a door. I burned those too. They came back again, documenting the fresh flames, adding a new image. That same rectangle, darker, its top seam now sharp like a crack. No voices warned me, no footsteps creaked. Yet the building throbbed with presence. Sub-bass vibrations felt, not heard. The overhead light flickered once, twice, settled into a dim gasp. Sweat cooled into clammy film along my arms. I rubbed them hard, but gooseflesh remained, stubborn as mold. When the third delivery rasped beneath the door, I didn't pick it up immediately. I paced, lungs pulling short, shallow drafts. My mind skidded. Dream, prank, psychotic break. I slapped my cheek hard enough to sting. Awake. The envelope waited. I fetched nitrile gloves from the junk drawer, the kind I kept for greasy bike repairs, and lifted the flap gingerly. 5 prints this time, each progressive. The mystery wall had grown a doorknob, antique brass, ornate like something from a Victorian asylum. The final photo showed me standing inches from it, right hand hovering, face blanched with dread. I had no memory of posing. Pressure built behind my eyes. Tears threatened, not of sorrow, but of terrified awe. I couldn't let that door exist. My mind latched onto the only half-remembered solution. Light, lots of it, pure and savage. Exposing film prematurely ruined latent images. Maybe bathing these cursed negatives in unfiltered white would unwrite them, prevent the door from imprinting itself into reality. I ransacked closets for bulbs, flashlights, LED strips. I stripped lampshades, taped aluminum foil behind every light source to amplify glare. The bathroom, windowless, became my improvised dark room turned bright room. I lined the tiles with garbage bags, duct-taped seams, hung a red scarf over the single bulb for safe light while I prepped. My hands shook as I arranged supplies. A basin of bleach as ersatz fixer, a spray bottle of plain water, the photographs sealed in a Ziploc. No developing tanks, no enlarger, only desperation. I cut the bathroom power, the scarfed bulb glowing dim crimson. With tweezers, I extracted the prints and groped for their hidden negatives, hoping supernatural rules followed chemical logic. The gloss peeled reluctantly, as if the emulsion still breathed. Behind each photo I found not acetate, but a kind of translucent skin, slick and warm. It pulsed faintly. A sour wave of nausea folded me. I nearly retched into the sink. I forced action, ripped the shower curtain aside, cranked the fixture's LEDs, which I'd upgraded last year to daylight-balanced beasts rated 4,000 lumens, and flipped the main switch. White fury flooded the room. The skin negatives writhed, edges crisping like leaves in flame, though no heat emanated. They dissolved into vapor that smelled of ozone and rotten flowers. I panted, chest hammering against my sternum. Tiny sparks pinpricked vision. Spots floated. Silence hovered thick as plaster dust. I killed the lights, eyes aching. The red safe light returned. The prints lay inert, dull, ordinary. Victory's bloom warmed my belly. A click echoed beyond the bathroom, metal against strike plate. I stilled, breath trapped mid-exhale. The chair I'd wedged under the apartment door scraped, toppled. Hinges yawned, yet I heard no footsteps, just a hush that felt sentient. I opened the bathroom door a sliver. The hallway beyond was night dark, save for a faint violet shimmer leaking from the living room. I smelled cold stone and wet soil, scents impossible inside drywall. My lungs fluttered like trapped birds. The living room wall now hosted the door in flesh. Brass knob gleamed. The wood resembled aged mahogany, grain swirling hypnotically. That violet light seeped through its keyhole, alive and patient. My instincts screamed flight, but fear pinned my feet to warm laminate. I clutched a flashlight in one hand, bleach spray in the other. Ridiculous weapons. Yet adrenaline sharpened edges. My pupils dilated. Air tasted metallic. I considered calling someone. Police, landlord, random friend. But what words could cage this? Instead, I advanced, steps muffled by the pounding in my ears. I stopped an arm's length away. Cold radiated off the door as though it opened onto winter. I remembered the camera on my phone. Maybe documenting the anomaly would anchor me to objective fact. I raised the lens, thumb trembling against the shutter. No preview appeared, screen black, though icons glowed. Then an image popped. Me, right now, viewed from above, phone raised. Behind me, over my shoulder, a tall silhouette loomed where nothing stood in waking sight. Its outline flickered violet. A tremor rattled my knees. I spun, nothing. The photo, however, remained, silhouette stark. Panic swelled until my vision tunneled. Fight or flight fractured. I chose illumination again. I darted to the fuse box, shut off every circuit except the bathroom line, then yanked extension cords to drag my arsenal of bulbs into the hall. I taped switches on, aimed beams at the door. Pure white blazed like noon in a desert. The mahogany surface absorbed light hungrily, not reflecting but drinking. Grain darkened, knots widening like eyes after dilation. I sprayed bleach. Droplets hissed, left pale streaks that quickly browned back to original shade. The knob twitched. Once, twice, then turned. No voice issued, but pressure shifted. Air funneled toward the seam as if the apartment inhaled. My heart hammered staccato. Sweat coated my back until cotton clung. I fought for breath, throat straw thin, mouth desert dry. I needed another negative, one untouched, to rewrite the scene. The envelopes. Maybe new prints lay inside, each staging the next moment. If I could intercept and overexpose them instantly, perhaps the chain would break. I sprinted to the entryway. On the floor, a fresh envelope waited, still quivering from delivery that made no sound. I scooped it up, tore the flap, fished out a single sheet. The image showed the door fully open. Beyond, a corridor of ash-white walls stretched into violet fog. At its vanishing point, my back receded, small and alone, stepping forward. I hadn't walked through, yet. Cold washed through marrow. The timestamp read 2:56 a.m., a minute ahead of the glowing digits on my microwave clock. The photo was from the immediate future. My vision shimmered. I felt untethered, as though gravity toggled. I bolted to the bathroom, flung on the lights full blast, slapped the photo against the glare. The emulsion bubbled, image distorting, but not before a new detail surfaced. In the corridor's far distance, a second door waited, ajar, violet leaking around its frame, leading deeper. The print sagged, melted into nothing. I exhaled a broken laugh, part relief, part hysteria. When I backed into the hall, the mahogany door was shut again. The knob lay still. Silence returned, a dense, waiting hush. I didn't trust the calm. I gathered every photo scrap, stuffed them into a metal mixing bowl, doused them in bleach, and stirred with a wooden spoon until sludge formed. Then I opened every light I owned and kept them blazing. Dawn seeped gray between the blinds eventually, ordinary, indifferent. For 3 nights, the apartment stayed quiet. I left the lights on, slept in short bursts, always clothed, shoes near. No envelopes appeared. I began to believe the light had starved the phenomenon. My nerves loosened by degrees. The 4th night, a blackout swallowed the block. Transformers popped in the distance, street lamps died. My apartment plunged into pitch, then purple glow. I grabbed my phone. The screen refused to wake, but the camera shutter clicked on its own. I felt cool wood against my shoulder blades, mahogany grain familiar. I wheeled around. In total dark, I saw nothing, yet the scent of winterstone threaded the air. My heart pumped so hard my ribs hurt. I inched toward the kitchen where a single emergency candle waited. Before I reached it, a soft scrape echoed, the envelope arriving. Hands shaking, I struck a match, lit the candle. Weak flame fluttered. The envelope sat centered on the table, neat, patient. I couldn't move. The air around it felt charged, buzzing against skin like muted electricity. After minutes that hurt my throat with held breath, I turned away, deciding not to open it. An obstinate, primal refusal. I doused the candle, grabbed my keys, and left the apartment without a backward glance. Downstairs, city power still sputtered, but distant windows glowed with battery lamps. I paced the sidewalk until sunrise bled soft pink over rooftops. Only when daylight ruled did I climb back. The envelope remained unopened. I sealed it inside 3 freezer bags, buried the bundle in the building's dumpster under coffee grounds and spoiled lettuce. Then I packed a duffel with essentials and left for a hotel whose walls I hoped were ignorant. I've stayed in 7 rooms across the city since. Every night, all lights on. No envelopes, until this morning. Housekeeping slid a letter under the door. No return address. The paper inside wasn't a photo, but a single negative strip, undeveloped, cool against my palm. Tiny frames glimmered violet when tilted. My name scrawled along the margin in black marker, followed by 2 words. Open dark. My pulse hammers as I write this. I haven't processed that negative. Maybe exposure ruins it. Maybe revelation enslaves me. I don't know. The sun is dipping. The hotel bulbs flicker every few minutes, the wiring old. I'm buying floodlights, lining the room ceiling to floor. I'll surround myself with white fury all night and pray electricity holds. Because part of me, some cracked, terrified shard, believes the door doesn't need my apartment. It only needs me. And it's patient. Story 10. Be meow. The forest around me felt wrong the moment I stepped off the main trail. The needles under my boots snapped too loudly, echoing as if the trees themselves were hollow. Air that should have smelled like pine and damp earth tasted metallic on my tongue, leaving a faint tingle on my gums. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shaky shafts, never quite reaching the ground, and every bird call seemed to cut out midway, as though the woods were swallowing the last notes. I'd hiked alone countless times, but this time each breath dragged a chill across my ribs, as if the world were exhaling something that wanted me gone. I pushed through undergrowth until the brush opened into a cramped clearing barely wider than a city sidewalk. There in the center sat a cabin no bigger than a jewelry box, shingles weather gray, a slanted roof, and a front door the size of a thumbnail. My pulse spiked. The structure looked old, yet lean shadows rolled over its surface like oil on water, distorting the grain of the wood. I crouched, pinched the tiny porch between forefinger and thumb, and lifted it. It weighed nothing, yet the boards creaked with the dull groan of life-size timbers. A square window no larger than a postage stamp showed only darkness, but the door hung ajar. Bending closer, I squinted through the opening. Inside, candlelight flickered across log walls, wooden beams and dust-choked rafters, an interior far too large to fit inside the toy I held. Heart racing, I angled the doorway toward my eyes. What I saw rooted me to the spot. I stood inside that room, life-sized, shoulders slumped, boots muddy, face streaked with sweat. My double's chest rose and fell, synchronized perfectly with my own breathing. When I inhaled, his shoulders lifted. When I exhaled, his posture sagged. The sight dragged a surge of nausea into my throat. The boundary between skin and world felt suddenly porous. I drew a shaky breath, and the cabin twitched in my hand, expanding a fraction, barely perceptible, yet real. The roofline pressed against my palm, and the clapboards rippled outward with a soft wooden sigh. Panic flooded my veins. Another breath. The cabin swelled again. It no longer fit between my fingers. I had to cradle it. Tiny shingles scraped my skin, leaving splinters that stung. I clamped a hand over my mouth, heart hammering. The rhythmic pound rattled my ribs, each beat a warning drum. Lungs burned. I couldn't hold the air forever. When I gasped, the cabin lurched, doubling in size. It now filled my arms like a shoebox. Worse, looking through the doorway, I saw the other me glance around in alarm, mirroring my own terror. The candle inside sputtered, throwing shadows that elongated into impossible angles, corners bending forward, beams twisting like softened wax. A sound rose from somewhere past the treetops, distant ribs of wind churning against themselves, a low moan that vibrated the ground. Leaves rattled, and the clearing tilted, nauseatingly skewed. I realized the cabin's growth wasn't just an optical trick. Its mass hungered for space, bending the environment to accommodate its impossible volume. Cold sweat dripped down my spine. Logic screamed, "Put it down, run." But something stronger, curiosity, maybe madness, kept my gaze locked on that doorway. The other me reached into a backpack, pulling out objects I recognized. My grandfather's compass, the cracked face watch I'd repaired last summer, a Polaroid of my college friends. He set each item on a table, then exhaled slowly. As the breath left his lips, the cabin shrank a little. Roof lines tightened, walls drew inward. Understanding hit me like a blunt stone. The structure responded to memory, expanding with the weight of recalled moments, contracting when those moments were released. But release meant erasure. My duplicate's motions felt ritualistic, deliberate, surrendering keepsakes to stabilize the space around him. A tremor rattled my knees. If I wanted out of this nightmare, I had to bargain with my own recollections. The thought gouged at something primal. Memories were anchors, proof of who I was. Yet the building now pressed against my torso, wood creaking under its own impossible expansion. The clearing shrank, trees bowed outward, pushed by invisible force. If the growth continued, either I would be crushed between expanding walls or swallowed into whatever non-place existed inside that doorway. Shivering, I slipped my backpack off and fumbled through it. Fingers numb, I pulled out my wallet. The laminated driver's license inside seemed suddenly heavier. Name, birth date, a photo where I forced a grin. I whispered goodbye to that cheap plastic certainty and slid it through the doorway. The card vanished in a faint flicker. Instantly, the cabin shuddered and shrank an inch. Relief and grief tangled in my gut. The edges of my own identity blurred, as if a corner of my mind turned faint. I reached for more. A crumpled gas receipt from last week's road trip with friends. I couldn't recall the route's exact turns, only vague laughter and music through cracked speakers. The paper slipped away, and the cabin contracted again, steadier now. But inside, my twin paused, head tilted as though listening to thoughts I could barely form. He felt the loss too. Each offering chipped at the scaffolding of my life. A pressed four-leaf clover I'd kept since childhood dissolved into the threshold. The memory of the day I'd found it dimmed, colors draining from the scene until only outline remained. The cabin settled, walls clicking into alignment. For a moment the air calmed, like lungs after a screamed argument. But equilibrium lasted seconds. My heartbeat accelerated, fear of forgetting accelerating growth again. The structure bulged outward, timber cracking like gunshots. I tasted blood. I'd bitten my lip. The world tilted, light dimming as treetops leaned further away. A heavy pressure built behind my eyes, as if the forest geometry pressed inward on my skull. I needed a final sacrifice, something dense with emotional gravity. The decision clawed at my chest. Among the few items left was my grandfather's compass, the real one, not the duplicate already inside. I had carried it on every hike, metal warm from countless thumb strokes. The memory of his stories by the fireplace, the smoky scent of his jacket, the deep rumble of his laugh. Those moments clung to the compass like filings to a magnet. I held it, palm slick with sweat. The needle quivered though no wind touched it, spinning in frantic circles. Tears blurred the wood grain blur around me. I inhaled shakily. Air rasped, lungs protested. As I exhaled, I pushed the compass through the doorway. A soft metallic chime sounded, like a dropped coin in an endless well. Light flared inside. My duplicate flickered, edges dissolving. The cabin shrank abruptly, compressing until it fit once more within my two hands. The forest groaned but steadied, trunk straightened, earth leveled. Yet my relief curdled. An emptiness yawned in my chest where the compass's weight used to anchor me. I tried to recall my grandfather's voice. It came distorted, watery, syllables slipping between fingers of thought. I staggered back, breathing ragged. Wood splinters fell like snow, catching in my hair. The cabin rested motionless, door open. Inside, the room was dimmer, almost skeletal. Table bare, candle stub guttering low. My duplicate stood, blurred, featureless now, a hollow outline wearing my clothes. It lifted a hand in mirrored motion, slow, uncertain. I raised mine. Our gestures synced, yet I sensed no connection, as though I watched a stranger trying on my skin. A whisper coiled out of the doorway. No distinct words, only a draft of cold intent brushing my earlobe. The shape inside turned toward the cabin's back wall, where darkness pooled like liquid. He stepped forward. The shadow swallowed him. The candle snuffed out, leaving bottomless black within. My arm jerked back on instinct, almost hurling the cabin away. Instead, I placed it gently on a flat stone at my feet. The structure seemed inert now, but I felt a tug, subtle gravity sucking at my remaining recollections. Forest sounds remained muffled, as if a layer of glass separated me from real time. Names of childhood friends hovered just beyond reach. The corner store where I bought sodas after school lost its color. I clenched fists, nails digging crescents into skin, fighting to latch onto whatever identity remained. I knew staying promised further erosion. Leaving the clearing required not a single backward glance. I turned, boots crunching brittle leaves, and forced myself to walk. Each step widened the silence behind me until the forest absorbed the cabin's presence, branches knitting overhead. Distance didn't restore memories already surrendered. Those gaps throbbed like phantom limbs. But with every pace, new details of the trail etched themselves fresh. Bark textures, fungal ridges, the exact pitch of wind through pine needles. New anchors forming in the hollows left behind. At the tree line I paused, lungs burning from exertion. I faced the path ahead, sunlight brighter, air cleaner. Yet at my core, a thin thread remained tied to that impossible cabin, an uncut tether tugging gently, reminding me that scales could always slip again. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the thud of an unfamiliar rhythm, then continued toward daylight. That night, back in my apartment, I emptied my backpack. Every pocket felt newly unfamiliar. I reached for the Polaroid of friends but found only blank space where the image should have been. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed. The note in its old gears sounded off, as though some fundamental pitch had altered. I stared at the empty tabletop, heart beating too loud, and realized the cabin's architecture persisted inside me, expanding whenever I recalled what I had lost. I keep mirrors covered now. Any reflective surface might show a hollow outline wearing my face, waiting in rooms too large to exist. Sometimes, as I drift toward sleep, my lungs hitch and I swear the walls of my bedroom pulse outward, seeking room to grow. When that happens, I force myself to forget a little more. An old phone number, the smell of autumn bonfires, the tune my mother hummed while cooking. The expansion subsides, but the emptiness widens. One day, I suspect, the cabin will fit comfortably in my palm again, door ajar, inviting me to look inside. When I do, maybe I'll find nothing, or maybe I'll find a stranger who has worn my life to threads, ready to step out while I take his place. Until then, I breathe carefully, counting each exhale, fearful of how large a single memory can become when the world decides space is negotiable. Story 11. I smell the smoke before I see the camp. The night shift just started, and the backcountry still should be empty. Reserve policy keeps hikers out after dusk, but a thin thread of burning pine drifts between the trees, sharp in my throat. My boots sink into slick moss. The forest hush feels pressurized, as if every branch leans in to listen. A clearing opens. 3 tents sag around a fire pit. No embers glow, yet heat needles my cheeks. On the ground lie 6 maps, spread flat, each one slashed with thick strokes of charcoal still ablaze. The lines crawl with orange filaments, but the pages don't turn to ash. I kneel. The heat radiating from those strokes stings my fingertips. The paper stays cool. When I lift one edge, the charcoal edges lift too, stretching like melted wire before snapping back into shape. I drop it and wipe sweat off my upper lip. No backpacks, no food, no sleeping bags. Whoever camped here vanished mid-task. I circle the site, searching for footprints. The soil under the pines is damp, perfect for impressions. I find a single line of boot marks that heads downhill to the riverbank and ends abruptly at the waterline. No slide marks, no return path, just nothing after gravel. It looks like someone stepped into clean air and disappeared. Radio static fizzles in my pocket. Headquarters checks every hour after sundown, but the unit only gives a weak hiss. I pace back to the maps. The charcoal strokes form tangled maze lines. One map shows the park boundary, another just carries frantic spirals. Heat rolls off them like open oven doors, yet the paper stays unburned. My heart tramples against my ribs. Sweat pools between my shoulder blades despite the cold night air. I decide to bag the evidence. As soon as I fold the first map, the glowing lines dim and go dark. The temperature drops around my hands, frigid, as if I plunged them into snowmelt. I shove the folded sheet into my pack. Flames recoil into darkness with a sigh. The other 5 maps continue to glow and crackle. Tiny sparks leap and fizzle in midair. The sound reminds me of grease popping in a skillet. Dusk hardens into full night. Cloud cover smothers the stars. Even the usual crickets seem muted. My flashlight beam cuts only a short tunnel through the black. The tents rustle though no wind blows. Nylon walls pulse in and out, breathing. My mouth goes dry. I swallow, throat sandpapered. I collect the remaining maps, forcing myself to ignore the heat. Each time a page folds, the charcoal lines flicker and fight, then collapse into dead gray. The clearing dims. When the last map goes into my pack, the temperature plunges so fast my breath fogs. The forest erupts with a new glow. Every charcoal fragment I brushed from the pages rises from the dirt. Dozens float upward, ember bright, lighter than dust motes. They gather midair, orbiting one another, joining tip to tip until they form a tall, twitching lattice. A totem grows, a spire of burning sigils. Heated air spirals around it, carrying the smell of scorched stone. The structure shudders once, then speaks in a voice like dry gravel rolling downhill. Complete the trace or lose the trail. I freeze. My pulse slams so hard I feel it in my gums. The sentence repeats, softer, then dissolves into a steady hiss like steam leaking from a pipe. I take one step back. The totem tilts toward me. Tiny sparks peel from its surface, floating close to my chest, stinging like wasp bites when they touch skin. I think about radioing for backup, but the unit only spits static. The totem's hiss threads into the noise, as though the signal itself is possessed. Snowy bursts of my own shaky breathing fill the speaker. Adrenaline rushes, my limbs prickle. The spire rearranges. Charcoal pieces snap apart, whirl, and reform into a hovering ring. Inside that ring, a single map unfurls, one I never folded. Its blank parchment glows. A black point appears in the center and pulls outward, drawing a fresh line. It mirrors the route from camp to the ranger station, a winding 6-mile trail I walk daily. The inked path ends at the ranger porch steps, then halts, quivering. Pressure builds inside my skull, as if my thoughts are being tightened in a vice. The whisper from the totem seeps through. Trace your way home. Don't cross the line you draw. Fail, and the path forgets you. My breaths shorten. I step forward and accept the charcoal stub floating in front of me, hot but not burning. The map settles onto a flat stone. Its surface throbs with faint orange light. My hand trembles. I start to draw a line from the camp icon toward a stand of cedars, matching the real-world direction. As the charcoal touches the parchment, the forest shifts. Trees slide aside, clearing a corridor exactly where I drew. The air smells of fresh sawdust even though no trunks fell. The trail begs me to walk it. I hoist my pack, keeping eyes on the map. Each footfall thuds in my ears louder than the last. When I reach the cedars, the charcoal lifts slightly above the page by itself, waiting. My fingers sweat. I sketch the next stretch, an uphill ridge. The slope ahead knits itself together, leaf litter arranging into neat steps. But a prior line loops near my boot. If I step over it, I will cross my own trace. Fear pinches my stomach. I sidestep, careful as a bomb tech. Wind rises, but only over the untraced forest beyond the corridor. Branches crash elsewhere. Inside my drawn tunnel, silence reigns. I hear blood rush behind my eardrums, taste copper. Halfway home, I realize each time I pause too long, the charcoal in my hand grows lighter, like it's burning without fuel. If it vanishes before I finish, the path will end. I choke down panic and keep moving, legs quivering. My shirt sticks to skin, soaked despite cold air. Shapes flicker at edges of light. When I glance up, the trees beyond the safe corridor lean inward, trunks warped as if melted. Their bark weeps black sap. My vision pounds with every heartbeat. I lock my gaze on the map, but peripheral shadows stretch talons toward my route, retreating when lines advance. Paranoia claws at me. If I drop the map, will those things flood in? I skirt a fallen log. The ground hums underfoot, matching pulse. The smell of smoke returns. Charcoal shavings drip from the stub like molten metal, then evaporate. I feel watched from behind. Turning my head risks stepping off the corridor. I grit teeth and push forward. At a narrow creek, my hand stalls. The official trail crosses by a small wooden bridge. I never drew bridges. If I attempt one now, I might set a trap for myself. Sweat rivers down my neck. Heart ricochets. I draw a slender arch. Immediately water parts, revealing slick stones aligned like vertebrae. I test one with my boot. It holds. I hurry across, knees wobbling. The creek roars elsewhere, but where my line lies, water hushes. Past the creek, the air thickens. Each breath feels syrupy. My lungs burn. A whisper curls inside my ear, my own voice, yet warped, telling me to look back and see what follows. The rational piece of me says that's the corridor fraying at the edges, sounds rebounding. Still, skin crawls. I clench my jaw until it aches, refusing to turn. The stub dwindles to a nub. Only a mile left. I draw faster, strokes shaky. The path on the parchment blurs with sweat droplets. My vision tunnels. My forehead pulses. Then the map buckles. A ripple distorts the drawn corridor behind me. Somewhere, I must have brushed the earlier line. A hiss erupts overhead. I risk a glance back. In the trees outside the corridor, ember eyes flare. Dozens. Figures, no larger than children but hunched and boneless, cling to trunks. They leap from shadow to shadow, tracking the tear slowly moving toward me. Their mouths are round holes glowing red inside. Pulse skyrockets. Muscles twitch. I break into a jog, trying hard to keep feet inside the drawn lane. Each stride slams pain into my shins. Air knives my throat. The figures crawl along the corridor margin, blocked by the invisible wall of my fresh lines. They chitter when I extend the path. They shriek when a gap appears. Half mile. The charcoal nub crumbles. Splinters stain my fingertips gray. I wipe them on my pants, press harder. The paper tears slightly. Panic spikes. I patch the rip with a shaky swipe. The forest flickers. Trees ahead wobble as if viewed through heat haze, then solidify. Lights appear in the distance. The ranger station porch lamp, weak but real. Relief surges and almost topples me. I draw the final stretch straight, ignoring the smaller bends of the real trail. Trees ahead snap into that straight line, trunks shifting with popping cracks. The earth grinds under the movement. 10 yards from the porch, the charcoal vanishes entirely. My hand closes on empty air. The path before me freezes, half finished. One gap no wider than a boot. Beyond it, safety. Behind me, the ember eyes roar. My chest feels like splitting. Sweat stings my eyes. I cannot step over that gap. To cross my line is to lose the trail. But the creatures press closer, confined by the corridor, yet grinning, as though they know stalemate favors them. The porch lamp flickers. I drop to my knees. I dig a finger into the dirt, scrape up cold ash from some long-dead fire pit nearby. The ash is dull, but in moonlight it hints of buried embers. I smear it on the map, dragging a faint gray streak over the small gap. The line looks fragile, maybe useless. I whisper through clenched teeth. It counts. Something in the air shifts. The invisible barrier shudders into place. My ears pop. The ash on the page glows faintly. I stand, legs trembling, and step across. Nothing stops me. The ground past the gap is solid. I stagger onto the porch, slam open the door, and fall inside. The station lights flare bright. Every bulb hums. Outside, silence drops. When I dare peek through the window, the forest sits calm, ordinary. No glowing eyes. I unfold the burning maps from my pack. They're blank now. No marks, no singe, just paper soft as fresh pulp. The map I used rests on the desk. Its final ash stroke remains, but only the end half, the portion behind me, has faded until near invisible. The stretch ahead, the piece under my boots, is still outlined, faint but steady. A compass pinned to the wall spins once, then points not north but at that ash line. The radio crackles alive. Dispatch asks for my hourly check-in. I answer, voice hoarse, that the backcountry is clear. They ask if I sound off. Maybe I should come in. I'm already in, I tell them. Yet my words taste wrong, like borrowed speech. My heartbeat slows, but a tremor lives in my fingers. I examine my boots. Charcoal dust clings to the soles, traced in thin filaments. When I wipe them, the dust refuses to leave, settling back into the same pattern. The corridor I drew. I realize every place I walk tonight will carry that trail forward. If I cross it, who knows what barrier I snap. Outside, a single ember drifts past the porch light. It dips, waiting. The whisper returns, softer than a breath through pine needles, reminding me that trails, once started, want finishing. And I'm never more than one wrong step from erasing myself. I sit at the desk until dawn, map open, pencil hovering. I could complete the trace, carve a full circle back to camp, lock the corridor forever. Or I could burn the page and test whether fire obeys new rules. The choice hums under my skin with each heartbeat. Rays of first light bleed over the treetops. The forest looks harmless, but part of it now belongs to the charcoal line and to whatever eyes watched within the dark. The discomfort lingers, a pressure behind the sternum. I escaped, yet the path keeps growing. Every breath feels like drawing another inch, and I don't know where my own trace ends. Story 12. I never trusted the Amazon silence. It was too heavy, as if every vine and leaf had agreed to smother sound. The humidity pressed against my lungs while insects droned above an endless sea of green. I had come alone, chasing rumors of an unmapped branch of trail near the Alto Solimões. Locals warned me about Lugar da Respiração de Barro, the place where clay breathes. They said it with eyes averted, almost embarrassed by the superstition. I laughed it off then. Now my pulse hammers at my ribs every time I remember their uneasy smiles. By mid-afternoon, the canopy broke open into a clearing shaped like a shallow crater. In its center stood a cluster of huts molded from damp, reddish clay, fresh enough to glisten in the sun, seams still oozing moisture. No smoking hearths, no footprints, no tools, just walls slumping at the edges as if they had exhaled recently and lost the will to hold shape. A damp mineral odor rolled off them, oily and cold despite the heat. On the surrounding trees, wooden masks dangled from lianas, some carved like human faces, others warped into twisting maws. Every mask dripped a thin vapor that curled downward, frosty, impossible under the brutal equatorial light. The haze hugged the bark before sinking to the underbrush. Air that should have smelled of rot and foliage tasted metallic, in the back of my throat, like licking old coins. I told myself the masks only seemed to stare because hollow eye holes catch light oddly. Still, sweat ran down my spine. My fingers tingled, a rush of pins. I felt watched from above and below at the same time. No sound besides my ragged breathing and a distant rush of river. Even the usual birds had fallen mute. I set my pack near the largest hut. Clay stuck to my boots, leaving perfect impressions before swallowing them up again, as if the ground wanted to erase proof I was ever there. I took photographs, noting the symmetry of the village. Huts arranged in a ring, masks marking an outer ring, an empty amphitheater awaiting an audience. Clouds thickened into bruised purple near sunset. Wind slipped through the clearing, low and sickly sweet, carrying the faint beat of drums. Not music, just a single low thump, spaced like a slow heartbeat. I scanned the trees. Nothing but masks wobbling slightly, exhaling their impossible fog. Dark came fast. I pitched my tent on firmer soil at the edge of the clearing, too keyed up to eat anything more than 2 crackers. The drumbeat drifted in and out, never closer, never farther. My flashlight beam felt anemic against the clearing. Every tree backlit the masks, so each seemed ringed with a snarling halo. The bark appeared wet, though the air stayed dry. I recorded a voice memo describing the layout, the smell, the drumming. My own voice sounded distant, flattened, as if I had spoken from inside a jar. Wind died. Absolute stillness clamped over the clearing. Then the ground beneath my tent flexed. A subtle rise. The soil lifted, dropped, lifted again, rhythm matching the drums. I knelt, pressed my palm to the earth. It felt warm, warmer than the air. A slow inhale, a slow exhale. Panic punched through my chest. Heart slammed fast, mouth boiled dry. I unzipped the flap. The clearing glowed faintly with moonlight. Masks twisted on their vines, facing inward now, all tilted toward my tent. There had been at least 40. Now every single one centered on me. The frost mist from their mouths pooled across the clearing floor, rolling over my boots like icy breath. I remembered what the boatmen had muttered on the way upriver. Outsiders feed the breathing ground. I had shrugged, thinking he meant mosquitoes. Now the phrase scraped inside my skull. A plan formed, quiet, desperate. If this was ritual space, maybe my safest move was to observe, not interfere. I sat cross-legged outside the tent, head bowed, hands open on my knees, forcing myself to breathe slowly. I pictured a tourist at a remote shrine, respectful, harmless. The drums responded. 2 new beats joined the first. The ground pulse quickened. Clay walls of the huts trembled. Thin slivers slid down like perspiration. The air smelled of wet iron and sour fruit. My stomach knotted. There was no logic in staying put, yet every instinct warned against running. Where could I go? Jungle pitch black, vines neck-high, river miles off. Time warped. Seconds stretched until they felt like whole minutes. Drums wrapped around me in concentric circles. Left ear, right ear, spine. I sensed figures moving at the edge of the mask's ring, though the undergrowth never rustled. Only a faint hiss, like breath drawn between teeth. At some point I must have dozed or dissociated. When awareness snapped back, I was inside the largest hut, seated before a trough of slick brown clay. My clothes were untouched, but my palms were coated in wet earth. A mask rested beside the trough, smooth, unfinished, eye holes blank. In the clay, 2 shallow prints resembled hands mid-scoop. Had I been shaping something? No memory. Glowworms or fireflies pressed against the hut's walls, giving off sickly turquoise light. Shadows crawled in loops, never settling into shapes I recognized. The drums lowered to a subterranean throb, vibrating my teeth. Words bubbled up from nowhere. Finish the face, give it breath, or become its breath. Not spoken aloud, jammed directly into my skull, heavy as a migraine. I seized a shard of gourd lying nearby and dug lines across the mask's surface. Clay squealed under the blade. Sweat blurred my vision. Each scratch felt intimate, obscene. I didn't know the pattern, yet my hands moved with certainty, carving slanted eyes, a narrow nose, a wide, slack mouth. The ground under the hut convulsed, lifting me an inch before settling. My pulse matched its rhythm. Every exhale rattled loose clay dust into my throat. When I finished the final line, the hut sighed. Air pressure dropped. The mask's eye holes billowed cold vapor, a twin plume rolling across my knees. A choice balanced in the space: put the mask on or shatter it. My fingers trembled over the edges. If I placed it against my face, maybe I joined the ring and left unharmed. Or maybe I fed whatever breathed beneath. If I broke it, perhaps the ritual stopped, or reacted. My hands moved before thought caught them. I raised the mask, felt chilly damp against my cheeks. Breath jammed in my lungs, vision tunneled through the empty sockets. The clearing appeared again, though the hut walls still surrounded me. Impossible layers overlapped. Masks on trees faced outward now, toward the jungle, as if guarding me. Wind roared, though leaves stayed motionless. I peeled the mask away. My skin tingled, as if cold worms crawled under the pores. I set it on the ground, snapped it in two. Clay shards thudded. The drums ceased. Silence hit like an airless room. A low groan rolled through the earth, not anger, more resignation. The hut walls liquefied, melting downward until only puddles of mud remained. Cool air rushed in. I stepped outside. Dawn brushed horizon with weak gray. All huts had collapsed into steaming heaps. The masks dangled lifeless, no vapor, edges dry. I waited for soil to pulse again. Nothing. I backed away, eyes stinging from sleepless grit. Each step felt lighter, as if the ground no longer clung. At the tree line I looked once more. A single mask remained upright in the mud where the large hut had stood. It faced me. Thin cracks spidered across the features, same pattern I'd carved. Steam curled from those cracks, coiling lazily skyward. I turned and pushed into the jungle. Branches slapped my arms. Thorns opened small cuts on shins. I didn't care. I moved until the clearing vanished behind walls of green. Hours later, I reached a logging track and flagged a supply truck. The driver eyed my mud-caked clothes and muttered that I looked tocado. He spoke of fever dreams common to rookies, hallucinations caused by spores. I nodded, too tired to argue. He offered water. I drank until my stomach cramped. The clay taste lingered. Back in Manaus that evening, the city's chaos should have drowned memory. Yet every engine rumble carried an undertone of drums. In my hotel shower, warm tiles seemed to inhale and exhale. When I closed my eyes, I felt masks turning. The next morning, I shipped my field gear home and booked the first flight out. At the airport, a souvenir stall displayed cheap wooden masks for tourists. One bore cracked lines almost identical to mine. Steam rose faintly from its nostrils, vanishing before anyone else noticed. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket, a silent notification I hadn't set. Screen lit with one word in Portuguese. Respirar. Breathe. I shut it off. The battery icon still glowed. I'm writing this in a layover lounge far from the jungle, air conditioning humming, floor solid beneath my feet. Yet sometimes the ground under my chair lifts a fraction, settling with a sigh. I keep reliving that moment inside the hut, mask cold against my skin, choice hanging like a blade. I broke it once. I'm not sure I broke it for good. When I shut my eyes tonight, I know drums will find the hollow of my ribs. The clearing waits, clay fresh, ritual unfinished. Somewhere a breathing earth remembers the taste of an outsider and wonders whether I respected the right or only paused it. I hope distance matters. I fear it does not. Story 13. I was halfway through the graveyard shift, the hour when air tastes stale and fluorescent lights hum like insects trapped in glass. When the tow truck backed up to Bay 3, rain fell in crooked lines, and the truck's hazard strobes painted seizures of color across the wet concrete. The driver never stepped out. I only saw a gloved hand wave once before the cab lurched away, leaving its freight behind. The freight was a late 90s sedan, dented hood warped upward like a split lip. But there was nothing under that hood. No engine, no hoses, not even a lonely bolt. Just a hollow, greasy cavity that stank of burnt copper. Inside, on the driver's seat, lay a pocket watch big as a tangerine, lid open, glass cracked. Instead of a ticking second hand, a silver needle jerked in short bursts. It didn't mark seconds. It drummed, tap, 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 slow and deliberate, a measured ripple I felt in my own chest. I told myself someone had wired a prank metronome. The thought lost weight the instant I lifted the watch. Metal vibrated against my palm, and my pulse matched it, beat for beat. When I set it down, my heart stumbled, as though disappointed by the separation. A sensible man would have called the boss, maybe even the cops. I'm not always sensible, especially after 15 straight hours with only vending machine coffee keeping my eyelids propped. Curiosity outweighed caution. I clipped booster cables to the battery that dangled uselessly in the cavernous bay. Why a battery at all if the engine was gone? And slid behind the wheel. The upholstery smelled of cold rust and lavender, a mix that turned my stomach. Key in, turn. The watch needle lurched forward. A pulse of white heat lit my ribs. My heart vaulted against them, thudding as if someone were pounding a fist on the inside of my sternum. The dome light blinked, though no power should flow anywhere. Then everything went silent except for the double heartbeat. Mine and the watch's. Breathing through grit, I pried my fingers from the key. The needle settled on a marking shaped like a crescent moon. My heartbeat slowed, hovering at the same rhythm. Sweat trickled down my spine even though the bay heaters had clicked off hours earlier. I tried to convince myself the correlation was coincidence. To disprove it, I tapped the watch face. The needle skipped. My pulse skipped harder, pain blooming across my chest like an ice pick dragging sparks. The message was clear. The thing owned my rhythm. Fluorescents buzzed louder. Their glow shifted from hospital white to a sickly gray that flattened depth and smeared edges. Tools hung on pegboards seemed to stretch. Handles dripping shadows that pooled at my boots. I caught a faint whine, the soft starter motor gasp of an absent engine. Imagined, I told myself again. Everything here could be explained if I just piled up enough rational words. I forced myself out of the car and paced the bay, counting steps to anchor sanity. 10 paces left, 10 right. Each footfall raised dust I hadn't noticed before, and every mote spun downward instead of up, as if gravity sulked in reverse tonight. Somewhere behind me the watch ticked on, every beat a reminder that my heart had been rewired without consent. Glove compartment. Maybe paperwork would tell whose sick idea this was. I snapped it open. A single ledger slid out, bound in cracked navy leather. Inside, neat columns listed times and heart rates. The last entry read, 0318, 76 BPM, sync failed. A smear of dark oil streaked beneath the note, dried like clotted blood. Next to the columns, a diagram showed a pocket watch, the needle pointing to a thin sliver between quarter marks labeled lunar. Beneath it, a scrawl, match phase to pulse before key turn. I checked the wall clock, 0312 a.m. My own watch showed the same. 6 minutes until whatever happened at 0318 for the last poor fool. Wind rattled the roll-up doors, though the forecast had promised calm skies. With every shake, the empty engine bay groaned, metal echoing like an animal throat. I saw movement beyond the windshield. Not reflections, but silhouettes made of refracted light, piston shapes stroking in slow motion. Instinct screamed that if the sedan ever grew a real heart, it would be mine. 3 minutes lost to staring. My pulse crept upward. The pocket watch needle twitched along with it, sliding off the crescent toward an unmarked wedge. I had to synchronize. Ledger instructions be damned. I snatched the watch, thumb on crown, and rolled it back 1 notch. Needle resisted, grinding over gear teeth that felt soft, almost living. My heart balked, stumbling into arrhythmia. Colors popped at the edge of vision. Ears filled with the roar of blood, a tunnel narrowing too fast. Stop. Breathe through it. Inhaling dust-tainted air, I recalled a trick from basic CPR training. Press 2 fingers to the carotid, count beats. Exhale slower than inhale. I pictured the moon dial as a metronome, counted 4 strokes per breath cycle. Gradually, the needle and my artery aligned. My chest eased, but skin stayed damp. Lights flickered again. The bay clock read 03:16. I had 2 minutes until the time of the failed attempt. I adjusted the watch 1 tooth forward to the exact midpoint of the crescent, hoping that was the lunar phase the ledger meant. The needle settled. I hurried back into the driver's seat, each step through air thickening like syrup. Key in. Pause. Violent shudder down the steering column. The ghost of an engine idling. I waited until my pulse thudded precisely with the watch's tap-tap. Then I twisted the key. Every light in the workshop exploded on. Not in a flash, but a pulse. Pounding luminescence synced to a single beat. My heart surged but stayed even with the watch. From the empty engine bay rose the wet glide of pistons, metallic clanking, the whoosh of intake valves sucking non-existent oxygen. I felt all of it inside my chest and in the wheel vibrating under my palms. Hold steady. I thought the harmony would free me. Instead, seconds later, the watch needle jerked beyond the crescent into a dark gap shaped like a gibbous void. My heart followed, forced into sprint. Pain speared left arm, sweat iced my neck. I realized the cycle wasn't about matching once. It demanded constant alignment, chasing phases I could neither predict nor endure. Blurred edges on vision grew teeth of static. Each breath rasped as though lungs scraped rust flakes. Still, fear didn't freeze me. It sharpened. Trembling hands turned the watch crown backward a hair, needle easing, pulse dropping. Another hair forward, preventing a stall. I found myself jockeying the mechanism the way a conductor cues musicians. Except my own heart was the instrument, and the sedan the deaf, hungry listener. Outside the windshield, phantom pistons pounded faster, shadow numbers rising on an invisible tachometer. I sensed the vehicle would steal my rhythm completely if it reached redline. The ledger's failed attempt suddenly made terrible sense. Whoever logged 03:18 ran out of buffer and drowned in their own racing heartbeat. I refused that end. The needle nudged forward again. I countered with a backward twist, but resistance strengthened. Crown turned spongy, like flesh instead of brass, and a chill crawled beneath fingernails. Inch by inch, the watch tried to lock itself, to cement a tempo too brutal for arteries to handle. I jammed my thumb harder, grinding gear work until a tiny ping echoed. A tooth snapping, maybe. The needle wobbled, then halted on the original crescent. Instant relief. My pulse slackened into a pace fit for rest, not chase. The workshop dulled, fluorescence glaring steady white again. Phantom pistons dissolved, leaving only vacant steel under the hood. I slumped sideways, forehead against the cracked window. Engine silence became thunderous. For a long minute I listened to my own breathing. Slow pull, slower release, fog on glass. Finally I pushed the key to off, pocketed the mutinous watch, and stepped out. My knees threatened collapse but held. The sedan no longer radiated menace. It sat gutted and dumb, like any junker waiting the crusher. Still, I yanked bay doors open and rolled the car outside using nothing but momentum and shaking resolve. Dawn's first gray sliver crept across the horizon, just enough light to reveal the tow truck's tracks ending abruptly, rubber disappearing into gravel as if it had never existed. I locked the doors behind me, The cracked watch felt warm through my coveralls, faint tremors still ticking against my thigh. I told myself I'd toss it into the deepest scrap bin, weld the lid, drive the whole mess to the landfill. Instead, as the first coffee of morning hissed from the break room pot, I found myself cupping the thing, staring at the stilled needle. It hadn't budged since the gear stripped, and yet, every 30 or 40 seconds, I felt a phantom thump in my chest when no actual beat followed. A skipped echo, as if the watch kept time elsewhere, and occasionally reminded me who had led the dance. I stayed on shift until replacement arrived. No report filed. Who would believe a story measuring terror in beats per minute? When I finally walked outside, the sedan was gone. Not towed, not pushed. Just an oil shadow on asphalt, already drying in the sun. Now, nights run longer even when clocks insist otherwise. Sometimes, lying in bed, I hear the watch faintly tapping from the drawer where I locked it. My pulse answers before my mind wakes. I count the spaces between hits, terrified that one dawn I'll find the needle pointing at some new unknown phase, and my heart racing to keep up. I keep the watch anyway. Breaking it might stop everything. Or nothing. Maybe the mechanism just wants to teach rhythm. Maybe it waits for the perfect beat to start an engine made of bone and fear. Until then, I measure my life in careful breaths, listening for the double heartbeat and praying I never hear that final click. Because if the watch ever ticks once more than my chest can follow, I know exactly where the missing engine will come from, and who will be left idling, forever pinned to red line. Story 14. The road to Caligo Cove looked ordinary on the map, a jagged line curling along an unnamed stretch of coast. But the asphalt felt wrong the moment my tires left the main highway. Salt haze drifted across the windshield like smoke, rough gravel popped beneath the wheels, and gull cries echoed with an empty metallic timbre, as though the birds were ghosts playing back a recording of themselves. My heartbeat quickened for no reason I could name. I told myself it was fatigue from the drive, yet my fingers squeezed the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I had chased odd rumors before, but none promised images as uncanny as a village that drowned every sunset without losing a shingle. I arrived an hour before dusk. Caligo Cove perched on a shelf of rock above a flat, shimmering lagoon. The houses sat tidy and undefeated, shiplap painted pastel blues and creams, windows trimmed and flaking white. No vehicles, no phone wires, not even a power meter, only a narrow footpath ribboning between porches crowded with rusting lanterns. Wind carried the briny scent of low tide, but the air tasted sharper, almost caustic, as if the salt had a fresh edge to it. I adjusted the camera strap biting into my shoulder and stepped out, boots crunching coarse sand mingled with crystals that looked like smashed glass. They tinkled underfoot and sent a chill up my calves. Someone was waiting. A figure stood at the far end of the main street, body tall and lean, skin a translucent opal crusted with jagged facets. Light refracted through him in prismatic flashes, as though he was carved from packed sea salt. When he raised an arm in greeting, grains sloughed off in a powdery mist that sparkled and vanished before it hit the ground. He didn't speak aloud. Instead, a whisper seemed to form inside my skull, inviting me to witness the procession and to take all the photographs my craft required. My pulse drummed in my ears. Every instinct told me to retreat, yet the image maker in me felt an intoxicating pull. I followed. The villager drifted ahead without footfall, turning occasionally so his fractured face could fix on me like a lighthouse beam. More shapes emerged. Men, women, elders, each composed of the same brittle mineral lattice. Their eyes were hollow pockets of moonlit brine. They watched me with patient anticipation, as if my arrival had been foretold by tidal charts older than math. I tried to ask where the water came from, but the question clogged in my throat, drying the back of my tongue to sandpaper. A thought not my own floated through me. The sun must dip, the water must rise, and the picture must be perfect. I set up the tripod near the weather-carved pier, The sky dimmed along the horizon, bleeding purples into bruised oranges. Wind died abruptly, the surf went silent, and the whole world seemed to inhale. Then the ocean began to climb. It wasn't a normal tide. There was no surge, no roar or whitecap. Instead, a glassy sheet lifted from the horizon as though the sea had become a single pane tilted toward land. It slid forward without breaking, transparent and silent, swallowing sand and stone and creeping up the street in a mirror-smooth blanket. Houses submerged like toys dropped into resin. Yet doors remained ajar. Lantern wicks still burned inside. Smoke from chimneys coiled lazily through the liquid without dissipating. I heard my own breath rasp, fast and shallow. Sweat sprouted beneath my jacket, cooling instantly in the eerie dampness. When the water reached my boots, it didn't soak them. It passed through the leather as if through an illusion, leaving them dry while a numb coolness settled on my ankles. The air outside the sheet felt ordinary, but the phantom tide carried its own climate, a hush that muffled even the blood pumping behind my temples. I lifted the camera, hands trembling. The villagers waded effortlessly, their bodies diffusing into shimmering halos where the liquid touched them, like salt dissolving in slow motion. They arranged themselves into two curving lines, forming an aisle toward the submerged chapel at the square. I pressed the shutter. A crisp crack snapped through my wrist. Pain spidered up my arm. When I looked, a thin crust of white crystals had blossomed on the knuckle of my index finger, the one resting on the shutter button. I flexed. The crust split with a gritty crunch and flakes scattered. The villagers' faces glimmered approval, their eye hollows brightening with inner phosphorescence. The message in my head sharpened, one frame closer to perfection. Adrenaline surged. I should have stopped, run for the car, driven until asphalt turned to memory. Instead, I pivoted the lens, greed for the impossible shot overriding fear. The procession began to glide. No footsteps, no knee lift, just bodies glissading through the spectral flood. Two figures carried a conch shell the size of a coffin, its spiral mouth pointed ahead like a horn. A low hum vibrated the water, plucking at my ribs. Droplets of sweat slid down my spine, though the evening air grew frigid enough for my breath to billow. Second shot, click. The shutter slap echoed unnaturally loud, followed by another crackle in my bones. This time the skin along my forearm erupted with crystalline patches. Every heartbeat sent microscopic fissures shooting outward, mapping my veins in prismatic frost. I gasped, tasting copper. Panic clawed at the edges of reason. One more perfect image, and you'll freeze solid. But the photographer in me argued that fleeing without the definitive frame meant failure, and failure, for reasons I couldn't articulate, felt more horrifying than turning to salt. I forced myself to breathe slow, feeling each lungful rasp past a throat that felt coated in grit. My left eye twitched, vision blurred at the periphery where salt dust glittered like static. The villagers raised their arms simultaneously. The conch bearers tilted the shell. A column of water spiraled upward, suspended like a liquid rope. Inside the helix shapes appeared, small silhouettes of fish, anchors, even human hands reaching as if pressed to glass. The column refracted the dying sun, casting latticed shadows across submerged rooftops. I knew, in the marrow turning to crystal, that this was the frame. Impossible geometry, sacred choreography, a miracle no lens deserved but mine. I adjusted aperture, damp slick fingers slipping on the ring. One deep inhale, pulse hammered uneven. Fast, faster, skipping beats like a damaged metronome. Click. Agony lanced shoulder to fingertips. My right arm exploded in a mosaic of salt plates. Joints seized. The camera almost slipped. I trapped it against my chest with the good hand. Bones inside crackled like ice in scalding water. Specks flicked off and dissolved in midair with audible fizz. I fought nausea, stomach heaving but empty. The villagers' faces dimmed, satisfaction giving way to something unreadable. I sensed their collective expectation. I should have kept shooting until no flesh remained. By choosing to stop at a perfect moment, I had broken an unspoken contract. The conscious hum flattened into a deep groan that rattled teeth. I staggered backward. The phantom tide didn't hinder me, but every motion shed more grains from my stiffening arm. Cameras dangled around my neck often felt heavy. Tonight it felt anchored to my life. I reached the pier, piling where tide met empty air, heart thrumming too fast. The village under glass rippled as if the ocean exhaled in disappointment. A path of bare sand reappeared, etching itself outward from my boots to the rental car like a tongue of safety. The salt inhabitants watched, brittle heads tilting in silent reproach. In my mind, their whisper returned, harsher. You saw what you sought. Now show the world or return and finish the crystallization. The implications settled like lead. Publish the images and lure more eyes, more artists, more cameras. Each shudder another donation of flesh to their procession. Refuse, and the phantom tide might follow me inland, reclaiming the debt. I slammed the car door with an arm that barely bent at the elbow. Salt dust cascaded from the sleeve. Ignition stuttered. The radio fizzed a static surf, resolving briefly into a chorus that sounded suspiciously like waves speaking my name. I drove anyway, wheels spitting gravel, pulse drumming double time. In the rearview mirror, the ocean was already low, village dry and unremarkable under twilight, as if nothing had happened. Yet I tasted the sea with every breath, felt granules grinding in my joints like sandpaper gears. Back in my studio days later, I imported the files. Each frame was immaculate, distortion-free, lighting ethereal, subjects encased in liquid clarity no software could fake. But embedded in the metadata was a final field I hadn't entered. Exposure remaining. 3. I tried deleting the tag. It reappeared. I tried deleting the photos. The thumbnails regenerated. And each morning, a new shard of salt appeared somewhere on my body, earlobe, cheekbone, eyelid, reminding me of the ticking count. I hear the call whenever the sunset reflects off a screen. 3 more exposures. If I lift the camera, the crystals retreat a fraction. If I resist, they spread. I know what the villagers want. The perfect gallery, the world witnessing their procession until every viewer feels their own bones begin to stiffen. I could release the images and be free, perhaps. Or I could smash every lens I own, seal the files in oblivion, and accept that one night I will wake unable to move, a statue of salt waiting for the phantom tide to carry me home. Either choice tastes of brine and dread, and every heartbeat feels heavier, as though someone else is counting shutter snaps inside my chest. Story 15. I pulled off the state road at dusk, wheels crackling over gravel like distant bones, and the inn appeared, a sagging rectangle of wood leaning into a hillside dense with cedar. No sign shone from its facade, but an amber bulb above the door flicked in and out as if breathing. Rain mist drifted sideways, thin enough to taste metallic on my tongue, yet heavy enough to dampen my jacket in seconds. Something about the light, the silence, the way the clouds pressed low, made the whole structure feel impermanent, like a half-remembered photograph threatening to fade. Inside, floorboards flexed under my boots with a wet groan. The air smelled of cooled ash and old soap. Lamps, their shades yellowed and splitting, offered more shadow than glow. From the reception alcove, a woman emerged, small, straight-backed, gray hair in a taut coil. Her eyes barely blinked. Without greeting, she slid a leather-bound ledger toward me. I signed. The pen left a faint copper scent I couldn't place, almost sweet, like a bruised peach left under the sun too long. She gestured to a staircase. 3rd door on the right, she conveyed in a voice low and cracked, warning that the house retires early. No warmth, no welcome, only a soft scrape of words that felt like instructions at a border checkpoint. I climbed, luggage thumping against narrow walls. Every step triggered a small breath in the wood, as though the planks inhaled the moment my weight found them. My room held a single bed, a thin wardrobe, and a window filmed by condensation that refracted the porch light into a smear. The sheets smelled faintly of moth wings and vinegar. A draft from somewhere underneath carried a colder undercurrent, edged with something sharper, an aroma I couldn't name, but recognized as out of place, like spice on winter air. Sleep didn't come. The inn creaked in rhythms too deliberate for settling timber. Between gusts of wind, I heard a muffled clink, repeated, almost ceremonial. Curiosity drew me to the hallway. I followed the cold scent wafting up the stairwell. At the bottom, I found a door hidden behind a tapestry of faded florals. It opened without resistance. The basement steps descended into mottled darkness. The bulb above me buzzed, then steadied. Stone walls glistened with seepage. On a long bench sat glass jars of assorted sizes, each sealed with wax. Dozens, maybe hundreds, arranged in irregular rows like soldiers waiting inspection. Some jars held liquid stained sepia, others powders fine as pollen, others nothing visible at all. Yet every vessel glimmered at its core, as if containing a secret light. Metal shelving in the far corner clattered with the same repetitive chime I'd heard, lids tapping faintly against glass as the foundation shivered. My pulse hammered hard enough to tilt my vision. Still, I stepped closer. Each jar exuded its own invisible halo. One, no bigger than a shot glass, radiated the scent of a storm striking pavement on a July afternoon. Another, taller, whispered roasted chestnuts, and pages of a library book cracked open for the first time. I inhaled, hunger tugging at some instinct older than memory. When I lifted a vessel, the wax crumbled with dry sighs. Vapor swirled, touched my face, slid into my nostrils. Instantly, I stood on a shoreline at sunrise, toes sunk in cold sand I'd never walked, hearing gulls I'd never chased. The salt wind carried laughter, my own, but younger, carefree, edged with a language I did not speak. The room reeled, the vision snapped, and I was back in the basement, lungs full of something that wasn't air. My heart pounded erratic beats. Sweat broke at the nape of my neck, though the cellar's chill numbed my fingers. Behind me, the woman cleared her throat. The sound was dry parchment tearing. She informed me, calmly, the way one might mention breakfast hours, that every inhalation required an exhalation in kind. A law of exchange, she called it, older than any border or creed. Travelers arrived with scents of their own. The musk of first heartbreak, the ozone of a lightning strike witnessed, the iron tang of a wound that never scarred right. She collected them for safekeeping. Take, and one must leave. I tried to apologize, voice cracking under shallow breaths. She shook her head. Regret was not payment. I must contribute an aroma equal to the memory I'd sampled. My scents, she warned, were finite. Spend them unwisely and stories unravel. Identity thins. She stepped aside, revealing empty jars stacked neatly like blank pages awaiting ink. Panic clawed up my throat, metallic and sour. Visions of my childhood, real ones, fluttered, threatened to peel away. I imagined exhaling them into cold glass until they no longer belonged to me. My knees weakened, the room tilted. I reached for the wall to steady myself and caught a faint whiff of my own fear. Acrid, animal. She watched with measuring eyes that reflected candle flame where no candle burned. I begged time to think. She nodded once. The basement door shut behind her with a hush like a lid sealing. Left alone, I paced between the rows. Air pressed heavy, laced with 100 dreams not mine. Each breath risked borrowing more. I forced shallow inhalations through clenched teeth, tasting dust and rust. My shirt clung damp to my spine. Somewhere above, rain drummed on the roof slow and steady, a pulse I tried to match to calm myself. It failed. I needed a scent that cost nothing of me, something not yet written into my past, yet real enough to satisfy the law. A smell of promise. I whispered internally, hope distilled, belonging to no memory. But how to craft such an abstraction? On a cluttered work table lay simple tools: mortar, pestle, scraps of linen, a bundle of dried herbs unfamiliar in silhouette. I gathered what the cellar offered. A peace lily wilting in a cracked vase yielded glossy leaves that exuded faint chlorophyll sweetness. I scraped slivers from the cedar stair rail where my suitcase had nicked the finish hours earlier. From my own bag, I pulled a blank postcard. Its paper smelled of sun-bleached cotton. Sweat beaded at my temples and rolled down. Instinct told me my fear, though pungent, was too present, too personal to surrender. Grinding leaf, wood, and paper fibers, I imagined dawn breaking after a night without nightmares. I thought of breaths I had yet to draw, roads I had yet to drive, futures not chosen. The mortar's rhythmic scrape echoed my heartbeat. Into the pulp, I let one drop of spit, salt of determination, not of defeat. I fanned the mixture, coaxing vapor. At first nothing rose, then a thread of fragrance surfaced, fragile, airy, reminiscent of rain before clouds form, the way mornings might smell in a place where sorrow never took root. It felt like a promise, a memory forward, not backward. My chest tightened strangely, not pain, but vastness. I funneled the mixture into an empty vial, sealed it with wax softened by the flame of a single match. When the scent curled around me, it did not steal. Instead, it settled like a feather on the edge of perception. Real only if one wished it so. Steps creaked behind. The owner reappeared, eyes gleaming damp bronze. I extended the jar. Air between us rippled with tension. She raised the glass to her nose. For a heartbeat, the basement stilled. No drip of water, no rattle of shelves. Her eyelids fluttered. I sensed rather than saw the inhale. Then a faint smile cracked her austere face and she inclined her head. Transaction accepted. I backed toward the stairs, knees trembling so violently the railing blurred. She did not follow. Above, the tapestry quivered as though stirred by wind that couldn't possibly reach so deep. I climbed, lungs burning for clean night air. Corridors warped around me. Wallpaper patterns writhed, rearranging into motifs I didn't recall. Each lamp pulse seemed to hesitate half a second longer, delaying light as if savoring the moment. At my room, I jammed belongings into my bag, fingers numb, zipper teeth squealing in protest. The floor slanted, or I swayed, hard to tell. By the time I reached the porch, the rain had stopped. The world outside smelled different. Fresher, yes, but muted, as though someone had turned life's volume down one notch. I drove until sunrise, headlights carving tunnels through fog. A faint fragrance lingered in the cab, that airy morning before morning scent I had crafted. Comforting, yet uncanny. At a diner miles away, I ordered coffee. When the mug steamed under my nose, I tasted nothing. No roasted bitterness, no comforting warmth, just hot liquid sliding down. The pancake syrup, the butter, even the gasoline fumes outside, all dulled. As if the price for my invented promise was my ability to savor what once grounded me in the present. Now, days later, smells fade further. Pine on mountain roads, smoke from autumn leaves, even my own skin after rain. I worry what will remain when the last familiar aroma drains away. Perhaps a blank slate is what I offered after all, a pledge to experience the future without the anchor of the past. Some mornings I wake certain I hear glass lids tapping in the distance, calling for fresh exchanges. I haven't decided if I'll answer, and Story 16. The first sign that something was wrong came at 2:17 a.m., or at least that's when the bedroom clock decided time was finished. The red digits froze, casting a dull, unmoving glow across the ceiling. I lay there, wide-eyed, heart chugging too fast for the hush of the night. The house around me felt suspended, like a held breath. Then the whisper reached me, a faint thread of sound sliding under the doorframe, curling through the darkness like cold smoke. It was coming from the attic I had nailed shut last winter. I tried to convince myself it was settling wood, or a draft squeezing through old beams. But the whispers had cadence, hushed phrases that almost shaped words. My chest tightened, sweat broke across my scalp, trickling down the back of my neck in thin, icy paths. I forced myself to sit up, the bed springs creaking far louder than they should have in a frozen house. Every clock downstairs had stopped as well. The stove, the microwave, even the wristwatch on the entry table. all frozen at different moments, as if time itself had fractured into shards scattered across the rooms. I could hear my pulse in my ears, thick and uneven. The air smelled of dust and something sweeter beneath it, like aging wood varnish turning sour. I fetched the crowbar from the hall closet. My palms felt greasy despite the chill in the air. Each step up the staircase echoed, a dull thud that seemed to push against the silence instead of filling it. The attic door at the top bore 3 rusted nails. I had driven them in myself after a leak last December, promising I'd deal with the clutter one of these weekends. They pulled free with a shriek that curled my nerves. The door swung inward. The whispering ceased, replaced by a low, anxious ticking. Hundreds of ticks, unaligned and stuttering like a broken swarm of insects. A bare bulb dangled from the rafters, its filaments sputtering with lazy orange light. The attic was cramped, rafters sloping down like hunched shoulders. Dust motes stirred in the thin glow, drifting like ash after a fire. Against every wall stood antique clocks, mantelpieces with brass filigree, tall grandfather cases leaning on splintered feet, pocket watches pinned to corkboards by their chains. Their faces glimmered, but none matched the other. One read 7:04, another 11:59, yet another hovered at 3:33. The minute hands didn't move, but the second hands twitched in jittery half-steps, as if unsure which direction to obey. At the far end rested the largest clock of all, an ornate regulator taller than me, its glass door smeared with dust. Instead of numbers, the dial bore carved words: fear at the 12, anger at 3, regret at 6, and guilt at 9. Beneath the words ran a thin red pointer separate from the minute and hour hands. It pulsed, inching toward the topmost mark. Fear. A tremor rolled through my stomach, tightening everything inside. The whispers resumed, seeping from the cracks behind the regulator, coaxing, demanding. They pressed at the edges of comprehension, crooked lullabies promising an end to something unnamed. Memory stirred. This attic hadn't always been mine. I inherited the house from an uncle I avoided in life. He collected clocks, obsessed over them. At the funeral, someone muttered about timekeeping for the soul. I had laughed then, dismissing it as family superstition. I reached for the regulator's door. My fingers were numb, but I felt the cold glass vibrate. Inside, the mechanism was alive, gears spinning in jerks, springs flexing and relaxing. The red pointer had drifted past fear, sliding toward anger. Each shift sent a vibration into my bones, like a tuning fork struck against the heart. Then I noticed the plaques under every clock, small brass strips engraved with phrases: first lie told to mother, night I stole from the register, promise broken to her. My mouth went dry. The room smelled stronger now, old metal and a hint of ozone, like air before lightning. The pointer crept from anger toward regret. A thin thread of dread pulled tight inside my chest. I felt something unseen leaning in, waiting. Instinct screamed, confess. The attic wanted words, wanted truth cut from me like strips of flesh. I swallowed and spoke, voice cracked. I admitted the small betrayals first, the shortcuts at work, the money pocketed from my uncle's estate sale, the phone calls ignored when a friend needed help. The second I voiced them, the clocks nearest shuddered. Their hands jerked, adjusting minutely. The pointer paused, hovering between regret and guilt. The whispers rose, urging more. Sweat pooled along my spine, soaking my shirt. The bulb above flickered, shadows stretching and collapsing across the rafters like living stains. My heartbeat hammered, each pulse rattling my ribs. I confessed deeper secrets, failures I buried so long they tasted foreign on the tongue. The night I drove home drunk and hid the dented fender, the letter I never sent because forgiveness felt undeserved, the moment I chose silence while someone else took blame. Each admission scraped my throat raw. Air felt thinner, every breath a gulp. Studying the regulator, I saw the words fades lighten, as though each confession bled color back into them. But the pointer drifted still, inexorable, crawling toward guilt despite my efforts. Panic punched through me. My legs quivered. A cold trembling spread from jaw to fingertips. I rubbed my arms, finding no warmth. The room pressed closer. The clocks chimed out of sync. An ugly, staggered chorus stabbing at my ears. The floorboards flexed, groaning like something beneath sought escape. My vision narrowed, edges swimming. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging. I realized the attic didn't merely catalog wrongs, it fed on them. The regulator demanded the worst, the confession I never intended to say aloud. I hesitated, pulse thundering. The pointer kissed the edge of guilt. My breath seized. I could feel an invisible door behind me locking, cold iron sliding into place within the mind. The memory rose vivid and unwanted. Years ago, on a frozen night, I'd watched my younger brother pack his bags. He'd begged for help, one last place to stay. I turned him away, convinced my own life couldn't afford his chaos. He vanished into a rehab maze I never entered. We hadn't spoken since. That abandonment gnawed me during quiet hours, but I suffocated it with work and noise. Until now. I whispered the truth, voice trembling steady, admitting the abandonment, the cowardice wearing the mask of self-preservation. I named the guilt. The regulator shivered like a living thing struck by wind. Gears spun wild, springs snapped taut. The pointer halted, quivering at the apex, then inched backward. Relief hit like a cramp, sudden, painful, releasing only after twisting. A groan rippled through the attic, boards relaxing. The out-of-sync chiming slowed, then stilled. Each clock's hands ticked once, aligning at a uniform midnight. The whispers subsided into sighs, trailing into silence. I exhaled shakily, my legs nearly folded. The bulb's light steadied, though no brighter. The air remained stale, but breathable. I reached for the regulator door, intending to close it, perhaps smash it later, burn every piece of this cursed collection. The pointer, however, began a new motion. It circled smoothly this time, a measured sweep returning toward fear. My relief soured. The red tip completed a full revolution, then another, accelerating. The clocks joined, hands revolving faster than possible, numbers blurring into metallic gleams. No sound accompanied this frenzy, only a heavy hush that pressed against my eardrums. Cold realization spread. The attic had been satisfied but not sated. It would start the cycle again, dredging fresh guilt with every rotation. I would never outrun the reservoir of regrets a life inevitably generated. Time here didn't keep minutes. It kept sins. Something inside me snapped taut. I refused to surrender another breath to this mechanism. I staggered back, boots crunching broken glass from smaller clocks that had burst under the strain. Sharp fragments sliced my heel. Heat and wetness filled my sock. Pain grounded me, cleared the fog. I swung the crowbar into the regulator's glass. The pain imploded, shards spraying like brittle ice. The pointer spasmed, halted, then resumed its manic spin. I struck again, bending metal, warping the gears. Sparks danced. A coppery scent of burnt circuitry filled the air. Yet the clocks surrounding me clicked on, immune. The floor heaved. Dust cascaded from joists. The attic seemed to tilt, tipping me toward the center where the regulator bled cogs and springs. Whispers erupted, now sharp, scolding. 100 accusing voices layered atop one another. My ears rang, vision blurring. I dropped the crowbar, clamped palms over my ears, and bellowed the only defiance I had left. I would not feed them. I would not confess what future wrongs they anticipated. I shouted until my throat scraped raw. The voices recoiled, thinning into brittle echoes. The spinning hands slowed, reluctant. I edged for the stairwell. Each step felt unstable, the wood soft as wet cardboard. But the doorframe waited, a rectangle of shadow and possibility. Crossing the threshold, I felt pressure peel away, like stepping from deep water into air. The whispering cut off as if severed. Behind me, the door slammed without wind. Nails shot back into the wood, sealing themselves flush. The hallway clock ticked, alive again, marking 2:18 a.m. In the bathroom mirror, I looked gray, drenched, eyes rimmed red. My heartbeat steadied, though it echoed faintly with other rhythms beneath. Tiny ticks I couldn't pin to any artery. I wrapped my bleeding heel, washed glass from my hair. Downstairs, the microwave blinked 12:00 in steady cadence. Outside, wind brushed the siding. Normal sounds, ordinary hours. Yet when I closed my eyes, I felt a phantom pointer hidden somewhere inside, sweeping inch by inch toward points I couldn't name. At dawn, I carried every clock I could lift to the backyard and smashed them under a sledgehammer. Brass bent, glass shattered, springs coiled free, writhing like metal worms. But each impact sent a tremor through my arms that hummed with a familiar beat. The attic remains sealed. I have considered leaving the house for good, but something tells me the clocks will follow, nesting wherever guilt awaits. Time, after all, is just the face. The mechanism is confession, and confession has no finish line. The nights are quieter now, yet every so often, precisely at 2:17 a.m., the bedroom clock hiccups. It skips a second no one else would notice. When it does, my throat tightens, and I lie awake, counting the silence, feeling the air vibrate with secrets still begging to be spoken. I wonder how many minutes remain before the pointer finds the summit again. I wonder what I will have to admit next time, and who, if anyone, I will be afterward. The dread is slow, patient, settling in me like dust. And I know that somewhere above my ceiling, behind nailed wood and cobwebbed beams, the clocks are only pausing, never stopping, waiting for the next confession to wind them back to life. Story 17. I felt the first twinge of wrongness before I understood what I was looking at. Night had settled over the city, washing the windows of my studio in muddy reflections, and I was reviewing the day's test shots on the wide monitor. Landscapes, street corners, blurred passers-by, mundane pictures that matched the walk I had taken that morning. Then the sequence changed. The thumbnail grid filled with frames of a lone lighthouse on a jagged cliff, breakers exploding below it. The file timestamps were from minutes ago, yet I had spent those minutes here, hunched over my desk, not roaming windswept coasts. When I opened the first full-resolution image, my pulse quickened. The lighthouse's lantern room blazed white, bright enough to scald pixel edges. And there I stood on the balcony, one hand lifted in a casual wave, coat whipping in ocean wind I couldn't feel. My heart drummed fast, shallow beats echoing in my ears. I zoomed again, right into the grain of my own face. The figure looked back, same stubble, same tired lines, same crescent scar under the left brow, yet the eyes gleamed as though they knew a private joke. A faint hiss made me glance down. Fine golden sand trickled from the seam where lens met camera body, piling on the mat like grains through an hourglass. I grabbed the camera, expecting the familiar metallic chill. Instead, the shell felt feverishly warm, and the glass elements shimmered as if filled with liquid light. I yanked the battery, but the leak only quickened, glowing grains spattering across my knuckles. They burned cold, left pinpricks of numbness. I told myself to breathe. In, out, slow. The air smelled of salt and metal. Each inhalation scraped dry across my throat. Each exhalation trembled. The hiss turned into a soft susurration, like distant surf curling along a rock shelf, though the nearest sea was 200 miles away. More files appeared in the folder, populating without a cable, without a card reader. Frame after frame showed the same lighthouse from new angles, low shots framing its stone base, sweeping panoramas of a black sea shining with moonlit ridges. In every shot I appeared, always waving, always smiling that unsettling half-smile. The sand kept falling, a tiny avalanche across polished hardwood, spreading toward my tripod cases and racks of glass filters. I forced logic through the static building in my skull. Cameras don't generate sand. Lighthouses don't photograph themselves. People cannot exist in two places at once. Yet here was evidence defying every rule I trusted. My chest tightened, sweat beaded down my spine, dragged the cotton shirt into clammy folds. The studio lights flickered. Shadows knotted in the corners. I heard my own pulse in the wiring, a low thump matched by a hush of shifting grains. The lenses on the shelf shivered as though buffeted by unseen gusts, and thin cracks raced across their coatings. Sand leaked from them too, tracing glowing arcs through the dust. If the leak continued, the grains would bury everything: my gear, the floor, me. The intuitive solution blazed sudden and undeniable. Reach the lighthouse, the source, the origin point. Close the loop before the sand filled the room and froze my lungs with its luminous chill. But the lighthouse didn't exist. Not on any chart I recalled, not in any memory. I opened mapping apps, fingers jittering. I scanned the coastline within day trip range. No solitary beacon matched the angular masonry in the shots. My breath rasped faster, shallow draws that left me lightheaded. I tasted copper on my tongue. The sand hissed around my shoes now, bright particles rolling against rubber soles like beads across parchment. Then I noticed a subtle clue buried in one photograph, the faint smear of a highway sign barely visible behind my doppelganger's shoulder. Exit 17. Coastal route. The letters bent by wind blur, but real enough. I grabbed keys, stuffed extra batteries into a backpack out of futile habit, and waded through the growing dune toward the door. Grains pressed against my shins, prickling through denim. In the hallway outside the studio, fluorescent bulbs buzzed erratically. A dusting of sand clung to my cuffs, sparkling under the harsh light. My boots slipped on the stairwell as I descended 2 steps at a time, lungs laboring. Every thud of my feet echoed double, as if some unseen runner mirrored each stride half a breath behind. Night traffic was thin. I drove south, eyes flicking between fuel gauge and rearview mirror. Now and then I felt I wasn't alone in the car. Peripheral glimpses of movement in the back seat, the faint scent of brine riding the air vents. I adjusted the mirror. Nothing but darkness and the faint glow of instrument clusters. Outside the city, sodium lamps gave way to moon-whitened asphalt. The road stretched arrow straight, then curved inland through marshland. Fog pooled low, rolling like smoke across ditches. My knuckles blanched around the wheel as I scanned each passing exit number. 10, 12, 15. My pulse hammered louder with every sign, sweat dampening the cloth beneath my palm. Exit 17 appeared, half hidden by drooping pine branches. I turned onto a narrow 2-lane cutting through reeds. The headlights carved tunnels in the mist, and the engine's hum grew hollow, swallowed by open space. Somewhere beyond the black walls of forest, waves must have been beating shore, though I heard only the susurrus in my ears. Sand sliding, relentless. Miles later, the trees broke, revealing a moonlit shoreline. Swells glinted silver, yet no lighthouse crowned the headland. My stomach lurched. I parked on gravel pocked with tide debris and stepped out. Cold air slapped my face. Salt coated my lips. The sand stuck to my boots again. Luminous specks that pulsed like embers. A hush blanketed the night. Then, faint but clear, the metallic clang of a bellbuoy drifted from offshore, though I saw no buoy. The hairs on my forearms rose. I followed the beach, each stride crunching through slanted ripples of drift sand. My breaths came short, vapor curling away like pale smoke. 500 yards along, the shoreline bent, and there, jutting from a spur of rock, stood the lighthouse exactly as in the photos. It shouldn't have fit behind the previous headland, shouldn't have been invisible from the parking area, yet here it was. Weathered stone rising against star-washed sky, lantern ablaze in silent rotation. The flood of relief nearly buckled my knees, but another emotion crowded in. Dread waited with inevitability. I mounted a zigzagging stair cut into the rock. Each step reverberated through my thigh bones. The cliff wind smelled of ozone and wet rust. At the door, paint flecks peeled away under my touch, exposing iron swollen with corrosion. I pushed. The hinges groaned like something waking. Inside, spiral stairs corkscrewed upward. The air tasted of dust and ancient oil. My throat tightened. Heartbeat echoed in the hollow shaft. I climbed, boots clanging each riser. Halfway up, a low moan drifted from above. Perhaps the lamp rotation, perhaps something else. My shoulders twitched. Sweat chilled in the open neck of my coat. At the service platform, I paused. The lantern room loomed through warped glass panes, the beacon revolving smoothly. Sand coated the stair treads here, glowing faintly, the same hue as that leaking into my studio. Grains sifted from the ceiling cracks, spiraling downward in slow whirls. I brushed them off my sleeves. Skin stung where they touched. The final ladder led to the balcony. My heart scattered rapid beats through my ribs. I climbed. Metal rungs vibrated against my palms. Reaching the hatch, I shoved it aside and stepped into the lantern chamber. And saw myself. Not a reflection. A full figure, identical down to frayed collar threads. He leaned against the central column, camera dangling from a strap, lenses cracked and shining. The beacon's light swept across us, painting alternating bands of glare and shadow. He watched me with weary amusement, as though acknowledging a scheduled rendezvous. I opened my mouth, but words refused to surface. Fear squeezed my vocal cords. He didn't speak either. Instead, he raised the camera, aimed it at the glazing, and pressed the shutter. The strobe of the flash merged with the sweeping lamp. Outside the glass, the night rippled, as if sea and sky were printed on thin film that wavered in a heat current. I felt the floor tilt underfoot. My stomach rolled, vision tunneling. Sand streamed from the camera in his hands, gushing like a breached hourglass. Golden grains cascaded, pooled at our boots, climbed my ankles with icy bite. I staggered back, fists clenched. He set the camera atop a crate, stepped forward until our faces nearly touched. Under the harsh pulse of rotating light, I noticed tiny fractures running across his skin, as though he were made of brittle glaze ready to shear away. His smile trembled. Sweat, no, molten sand, beaded at his temples, trickled along his jaw, fell in glowing droplets. A realization cracked through panic. He wasn't double or ghost. He was the result of photographs taken from afar, a brittle copy decaying as the sand ran out. I reached for his wrist. Contact seared like dry ice. I yelped, drew back, feeling ridges of blistered cold on my fingertips. The copy's surface convulsed, fissures widening. A silent plea flickered in his eyes. For a second, empathy eclipsed horror. I understood the torment of a facsimile built of light and glass, doomed to collapse once captured. The beacon's beam swept again. The sand rose to my calves, heavy, numbing flesh through soaked denim. My breaths rasped, chest burned. I scanned the room, old shipping crates, busted oil cans, a folded chart pinned under a rusted compass. On the chart, a single instruction scrawled in smeared ink: return the glass. I grasped the cracked camera, the device bleeding its luminous sand. The lens shook loose, wobbling like a loose tooth. Instinct shouted that sealing the lens, reversing the flow, might stanch the leak in both worlds. I slammed the lens cap on. Nothing. The grains seeped around the rim. My double, already collapsing, pointed at the lantern housing. Inside, massive Fresnel prisms refracted white fire. Understanding slotted into place. That crystal heart, undamaged, might trap this runaway light sand if focused correctly. With arms shaking, I heaved open a maintenance panel, exposing the beam's core. Heat blasted my face, eyes watered. I wedged the failing camera into a cavity between prisms. The copy assisted, skeletal fingers guiding the body into alignment. Sand gushed, swirled, then reversed, sucked into the prisms like dust in a vacuum. A thunderous vibration rattled the tower, dust filtering from every seam. The flow around my legs receded, dragged backward in glittering rivulets. I gasped as sensation returned to numbed calves. The room brightened until every edge glowed. Then silence dropped, pure, ringing. When I looked up, the copy was gone. Only faint shoe outlines remained in a dusting of dull sand. A shiver traveled my spine. I stumbled to the balcony. Outside, the sea lay calm, moon mirrored in its skin. The lighthouse beam now shone steady, no longer pulsing, its glare muted. A hint of dawn paled the horizon. I descended, muscles trembling with exhaustion. At the cliff base, the beach looked undisturbed. My boot prints from earlier had vanished. I drove back under lavender dawn. The road felt longer, somehow rearranged. When I arrived at the studio, the door stood ajar. Inside, cameras lay silent. No sand on the floor, no luminous grains in lens threads. Yet an echo of brine lingered in the air, and the hardwood bore faint scuffs, as though something had shoveled dunes away in haste. On my desk rested a single photograph, printed on matte paper. It showed the lantern room from behind the lens, prisms of fire, and a blur that might be two figures working side by side. I placed it in a drawer, hands unsteady, and powered up the monitor. The storage folder was empty. 0 images, 0 evidence. Still, sometimes, when the studio is quiet and the lights hum low, I catch a ghost scent of salt. A metallic hiss follows, barely audible. A reminder that the line between image and reality remains hair-thin and fragile. I keep the drawer locked, yet grains of dull sand appear near the hinges every few nights, as if sifting from a crack in time. Each one glitters once before fading to gray, and my pulse stutters with the memory of that impossible beacon calling across distance that shouldn't exist. I haven't taken another photograph since,